来啦，坐。您的半拿铁，请慢用。
Half Latte, episode 162, starting now. Hello everyone, I'm Lu Fei, and he is Xiaolei. When you listen to this episode, you might notice a slight adjustment. Some of you might have noticed. Because we've always taken turns hosting, this week was originally Xiaolei's turn, but due to some special circumstances, we've made some adjustments, so I'll be hosting first. Alright, let's get into today's main topic. First, it's still an experience, 72.4%. In any case, you've probably guessed which company we're talking about today. If we've finished discussing portal websites, generally, it's time to move on to BAT. Among BAT, we'll start by talking about Baidu, one of the earliest founded and also one of the most important companies in the early days. Let's go to our first segment. First, where's Robin Li from? Do you know Xiaolei? He's from Yangquan, Shaanxi. Robin Li comes from an intellectual family. His father was a newspaper editor, and his mother was an artist. They had quite a few children. He was the only son born in 1968 with 3 older sisters and 1 younger sister. In such a family, as you can imagine, he was pampered from a young age. His 3 sisters doted on him, right? They took care of him. Of course, there are some retrospective interpretations linking his later business style to his childhood experiences, but these are common analyses and not necessarily accurate. However, he was certainly very privileged as a child. Young Robin Li didn't yet have the elite returnee aura we see today, because back then, he wasn't a returnee, he was still a big fish. As a child, he was quite mischievous. The more teachers criticized him, the naughtier he became. He once said that if teachers didn't criticize him, he'd be very well behaved in class. The more you criticize me, the more I'll mess around in class. He was soft-hearted but stubborn and didn't learn from his mistakes. He even got into fights with classmates, which led to parent-teacher meetings. At the same time, he had his own hobbies. What kind of hobbies? He loved traditional opera. Back then, the Jin opera troupe from Yangquan, Shaanxi, was recruiting, and he joined. The troupe quite liked him, but he didn't pursue that path. Additionally, his family background seemed quite good at the time. He even won awards at stamp and ticket exhibitions held in Shaanxi. As a child, he had the means to pursue his interests, right? Robin Li's grades in junior high were initially just average. No one had particularly high expectations for him, but he was smart. He scored the 2nd highest in the entire school, gaining admission to Yangquan, No. 1 high school, the best high school in their city. This high school was particularly important because even back then it already had computers, Apple computers no less. Other computers weren't really available. At this point, Robin Li was greatly influenced by his 3rd sister. Because her academic performance was exceptionally good, and she was a bit older, she would often pull out a small blackboard at home and give him lessons. He'd sit on a small stool, diligently attending his sister's private tutoring sessions. How amazing was his sister? His 3rd sister was the top scorer in the college entrance exam for Yangchuan that year, the number 1 in the entire city. Several top scorers in one family. She and Ding Jian, the later chairman of Asia Info, whom we mentioned before, were co-founders along with Tian Suning. They were classmates in the chemistry department at Peking University. Robin Li wasn't the top scorer. I always remembered him as being 1. Because statistically speaking, it's not that common for one family to produce 2 top scorers. And the probability of 2 people from the same family getting into Peking University is also very low. Actually, before his college entrance exam, his 3rd sister specifically took him to tour the Peking University campus to motivate him. She said, "Look at our school. You'll be studying here too someday." Robin Li was very motivated. Before that, he was mischievous. If he didn't want to study, he wouldn't. But his sister ignited his joy and interest in learning. It all depended on how much effort he was willing to put in. In 1987, Robin Li was admitted to Peking University's Library and Information Science Department. Why did he choose that? At the time, there were a few considerations. First, he judged that if he tried for computer science or other engineering fields, it might be too competitive. He might not be able to keep up. Library and Information Science, however, had some connection to computers. He thought, if I can't be the head of the phoenix, can I be the head of a chicken? Meaning, if he couldn't be the best in the most prestigious field, he could be the best in a slightly less competitive but related one. That was his thinking. There was another layer to it. He was drawn to the word intelligence. He heard intelligence and thought, could it be that in the future? Implying something exciting or related to espionage. And it was also related to national security. He thought it was about spies and intelligence. Later, he realized library and information science was actually library management. Once he got there, he found his classmates would joke, "Don't look down on us library science majors. Peking University's library history has a really important figure." This was a bit of self-deprecating humor. By then, Robin Li's 3rd sister had already gone to study abroad, and Robin had long planned to follow in her footsteps. Her studying abroad had broadened her horizons, and Robin felt he also needed to go. Honestly, having a broader perspective was quite important in those days. Anyway, when I was in school, I never thought about studying abroad. It's related to perception. By his junior and senior years, Robin Li was entirely focused on his studies, devouring TOEFL textbooks. He didn't date or participate in social activities. At that time, his mind was completely immersed in preparing to study abroad. His goal was to get into top computer science programs at Stanford and UC Berkeley, both prestigious computer science schools. But the difficulty was immense. Even as a Peking University student, and even though he scored very well on his exams back then, it was still incredibly hard to secure a spot. Ultimately, he was accepted into the State University of New York at Buffalo, also known as Buffalo University. After getting in, he went to study in the US. In fact, not just back then, but many international students today also cook for themselves. On one hand, it's about dietary habits, and on the other, eating out is expensive, so it helps save money. To make cooking convenient, Robin Li would buy a large quantity of chicken wings in pieces, throw them into a rice cooker, and let them cook all day. When he came back late at night, sometimes in the early hours, and was hungry, he'd just grab a bite. It was like a small snack stand, similar to Sha County Snacks. He ate so much of it that after a while, forget eating chicken, he'd throw up just from smelling it. He couldn't eat chicken at all. Later, many people who interacted with Robin Li or dined with him knew not to order chicken. Robin Li doesn't eat chicken. This photo of Robin Li during his time studying abroad has been preserved. This is Robin Li in 1994 driving a used Honda. You know, the model he chose was actually quite nice. Take a look! It was a very modest, simple Honda. He drove this Honda and the area was freezing cold, which made things tough. In winter, the car wouldn't start. After work, he'd spend a long time struggling inside the car, waiting. Now, he'd be struggling outside the car. It's cold outside the car. He had to shelter from the wind and snow inside. During his studies in the summer of 1993, Robin Li went looking for an internship and found a company called Matsushita. This company paid $25 an hour, which was incredibly high at the time. Even today, for an intern to earn $25 an hour is an exaggerated figure. Back then, word even spread that an international student had landed a high-paying internship. People would ask Robin Li, "Which company did you find?" He'd say, "Oh, just a small company, something like Matsushita." His classmates would hear this and exclaim, "Matsushita? That's Panasonic." "What do you mean? A small company?" He himself wasn't quite clear. He probably knew the Chinese name but not the English, so he didn't connect them. Robin Li interned at the Panasonic Information Technology Research Institute. What he worked on then was optical character recognition, a type of symbol recognition technology. This was very early in his continued learning. His internship ended in August. Panasonic made an exception and hired Robin Li to continue working part-time. They told him, "You're doing such a great job, we'd hate to lose you. Even if you go back to school, you can still work for us." Robin Li even turned the algorithm he developed during his internship into a paper, which was published in the academic journal Pattern Recognition and Machine Intelligence. So at this point, his internship was going well, and his studies seemed to be progressing smoothly. However, Robin Li still had a nagging concern, something that bothered him. He realized he preferred computer applications. The work he was doing at Panasonic was interesting, but it made him feel that if he continued pursuing a master's and PhD in academia, it wouldn't be what he truly wanted. He wanted to create things that could genuinely solve real-world problems. Since he was already pursuing his doctorate at that time, he spent a few weeks contemplating before speaking to his advisor about it. For his advisor, this was a big deal. But his advisor was quite open-minded and supportive. He said, "If your interest lies in the industry, then you really don't need to pursue a PhD. Go for it." Robin Li later recalled that he hesitated for quite a while, over 2 weeks. At that time, there was also a different societal context. People in China back then thought that getting a PhD abroad was a very prestigious and respectable achievement. But then I thought, is what others think of you more important? Or is your own genuine happiness more important? I believe what truly excites me is creating something that others can use. That's a wonderful feeling. That's the industry, not academia. The things I do in academia are only understood by 5 people. If what I create can be used by 50 million people worldwide, that's an exhilarating prospect. Character determines destiny. So, he decided he wanted to focus on these applications. And this choice, truly, the timing was incredibly important. In 1994, this was a critical juncture in history. A few years earlier or later, and this window of opportunity might not have existed. In 1994, against his family's objections, Robin Li resolutely dropped out of his PhD program. At that time, he had 2 offers, one on Wall Street and one in Silicon Valley. If you have an offer in front of you and you want to do computer applications, where would you go? Silicon Valley or Wall Street? Why? This company was a subsidiary of Dow Jones called IDD. Robin Li was drawn to its boss, who had a PhD from Yale University and had previously worked at Bell Labs. He was a big shot in the industry, and Robin Li wanted to learn from him. At this time, Robin Li also heard about the situation back home in China. Things were booming there, with places like Zhongguancun and various tech hubs thriving. Information technology was flourishing everywhere. He felt that his choice seemed to be increasingly reliable, so he continued to develop his skills at IDD. Not long after joining the company, he met Dongmin Ma, an international student pursuing her PhD in biology at Rutgers University in New Jersey. They met and got married within 6 months. Their love story began, and they are still together today. Dongmin Ma is also a very key figure at Baidu today. Time moved to April 1996. He had been working at IDD, developing various applications for them. Around this time, he attended an academic conference on information retrieval in Las Vegas. He realized, as anyone who has written or encountered academic papers knows, that there's a logic of citation. How important a paper is, how influential it is in academia, stems from how many other papers cite it, especially if it's cited by someone truly brilliant. Like Geoffrey Hinton in the field of AI, that's very significant. Robin Li then thought, now that we have the internet, can't web pages also have this kind of link weight? He began to research and invented an algorithm called hyperlink analysis. This was an algorithm, or method, he invented himself. It suggested that website quality should be measured by analyzing the number of linking websites. The more popular the content with users, the higher its ranking should be. Because with earlier websites, in the early days of the internet, you would memorize web addresses or rely entirely on word of mouth. Someone would say, sohu.com is pretty good, and you'd remember it and type it directly into your browser. Or another website, right? This domain is good, and you'd have to remember that too. There was no overall system to rank which website was. This was a good logic. There were no evaluation criteria, no centralized platform, but there were hyperlinks between websites. You could calculate their importance using a mathematical algorithm. If you were cited by a particularly authoritative website, like Sohu or Sina, that meant you were a big deal, and I'd give you more points. This is somewhat similar to human relationships. Generally, if more authoritative, more professional people endorse something, we tend to endorse it too. That's normal logic. In June 1996, Robin Li filed a patent application for his hyperlink analysis in the United States. He was also actively pushing his bosses to use his technology, as the company he worked for was itself a tech company. However, the bosses at Dow Jones looked at it and said, "We don't quite understand what you're doing, Robin. Why don't you work on something else?" Robin Li was quite shocked at the time. How could they not understand or agree with him? In 1997, at an academic conference in Canada, Robin Li presented hyperlink analysis again. This time, it was different. This time, the audience consisted of people from tech companies. They understood it. They weren't those Wall Street bosses. Everyone immediately recognized this as an opportunity. One company in particular was very important and showed great interest. It was called InfoSeek, an information search company. One of its founders, their CTO, was also a Chinese person named William Chang. He approached Robin Li and said, "I know you're a technical engineer. For an engineer, besides technical innovation, your greatest sense of accomplishment comes from seeing millions of people use what you create. The company you're currently with doesn't have the capacity to help you achieve that. Come to InfoSeek and what you create will soon be used by nearly 10 million people." Robin Li heard this and realized it perfectly matched what he had wanted to do all along. He thought, isn't this exactly what I'm looking for? First of all, InfoSeek wasn't a startup. Back then, it was already America's most famous, even most important search engine. Founded in California in 1994, it was one of the earliest search engines in the U.S. To give you an idea of its importance, Netscape Navigator's default search engine was InfoSeek. There was no Google back then. InfoSeek held that dominant position. Moreover, it went public very early in June 1996. It was a very well-known search engine company, and at that time, another factor was added to the weight. Robin Li thought, of course I'm going. The CTO liked me, and that made me feel confident. If it were the CFO who liked me, he might not have known what to think, right? Robin Li later mentioned that he worked at IDD on Wall Street for 3 years, and he put it bluntly, he said those 3 years were completely wasted. Honestly, what he did back then had little to do with what he did later. He was essentially building websites for publications like the Wall Street Journal, which was pretty basic work. He shouldn't have stayed there on Wall Street doing those things. But then again, it's hard to say. He said that himself, of course. If he hadn't been in that environment, would he have had the free time to ponder hyperlink analysis? It's uncertain. Anyway, time can't be reversed, so he'll never know. Regardless, in 1997, Robin Li finally moved from Wall Street to Silicon Valley and started working at InfoSeek. His work there went very smoothly. He reported to William Chang, and they collaborated exceptionally well. Then, in April 1998, Disney announced it had acquired a 40% stake in InfoSeek. Everyone felt they had even stronger backing now. There was major capital support behind them. Robin Li saw this as a great opportunity and actively began pushing his bosses to invest in an even more powerful search engine. It was urgent that we improve our technology and make it better. But the leadership above said, our search capabilities, supporting about 60 million web pages, are sufficient. How many web pages are even on the internet right now? So, Robin Li was a bit disappointed then. He couldn't see a future. Furthermore, although there was enough financial support, a large company's involvement, while seemingly a backer, was more about financial considerations. We all know that if any tech company is acquired by a large conglomerate, its approach to innovation and many other things changes. As a technical person, every time you want to do something, you have to report on its value, its commercial prospects, right? Why do it? Ultimately, it ties your hands. In the summer of 1998, Robin Li had an opportunity to return to China and give a presentation at Tsinghua University. Someone there told him, "You say you have this technology. Why don't you come back to China and start a business?" Who said that? An employee from Sohu. Robin Li saw that the internet in China was doing quite well. At that time, a book was popular in China called Silicon Valley Business Wars, published in 1999. It discussed the business competition in Silicon Valley using a traditional Chinese chapter-style narrative. What were the titles? Anderson Ventures into Silicon Valley, Clark's Keen Eye for Wealth, Evil Empire Fights for Every Inch, Mancini's Step-by-Step Strategy, Browser's Backyard Fire, Intranets, Three-Way Standoff, The Ancestors of Bonatti. This story was particularly exciting and seemed like it was written by a Chinese person. Many internet professionals in China were deeply impressed. Everyone read it. Who is the author? Robin Li, senior software engineer at InfoSec. This is how Robin Li first became known in the Chinese internet field. Many entrepreneurs love to write because they love to ponder, and when they ponder, they put pen to paper. In our last episode, we talked about Xiaolong Zhang, Yiming Zhang, Xing Wang, and Zheng Huang, who were all incredibly prolific writers in their early days. Robin Li also loved to write, so he simply wrote a book. He compiled all the stories he found interesting about business and wrote them in an ancient Chinese chapter style, creating this book. Being good at studying really makes a difference. This book brought him recognition, and entrepreneurship was now on his agenda. More importantly, this book introduced him to a person named Xiaoyuzhou. Who is Xiaoyuzhou? He was an American postdoctoral fellow in biology, but he was very interested in Silicon Valley, so he filmed a documentary called Into Silicon Valley. Robin Li followed him, one a writer, the other a documentary filmmaker. They were both in the same circles, and at that time, there weren't many Chinese people interested in Silicon Valley. Robin Li often followed Xiaoyuzhou, pretending to be a journalist, though he wasn't a professional one, just to satisfy his curiosity. But while following Xiaoyuzhou, he also helped him with some things. For example, he met Jerry Yang in person then, and spoke with Jerry Yang face to face. They chatted and so on. By the end of 1998, Robin Li's InfoSec stock options were worth over $500,000. He recalled, "At that time, I had no worries about food and clothing. A few $100,000 more in stock options wouldn't make me any happier. $500,000, you can't say it's complete financial freedom, but it's definitely enough if you're not spending lavishly." He said, "To join another company and let others' leadership and judgment decide my future is not what I want. Since I can see many things clearly and can determine the next direction, why not do it myself?" Very reasonable. During the National Day holiday in 1999, Robin Li returned to China again. This time, he was even more overwhelmed. The atmosphere in China was so hyped that if he didn't start a business, he'd be banging his head against a wall in regret. He found that many people were handing him business cards. This was in China, where people might have thought the internet wasn't that developed then. But he found that many business cards had email addresses printed on them. Also, he met Charles Jiang himself. Charles Jiang gave him a t-shirt with a big .com on it representing the entrepreneurs or tech innovators of their generation. This .com culture was truly spreading. Robin Li was thrilled. At this time, in 1999, China's first internet company also listed in the US. The first company wasn't Sina.com, it was China.com. We've talked about it, right? Xiaolei, we talked about Chinese concept stocks very early on. The three major portals survived the bubble after listing. China.com didn't do so well. Later, in 2005, wasn't it bought by Guangyu Huang? It gradually faded away. Robin Li started thinking about entrepreneurship at this point, but being from a technical background, he needed a partner. Dongmin Ma told him, "Why don't we find Xiaoyuzhou?" Xiaoyuzhou, wasn't he the documentary filmmaker? He had that kind of personality for dealing with people. Robin Li was a bit introverted, an engineer. They would make a good team, each handling their own area. Then, in November 1999, Into Silicon Valley premiered at Stanford. Robin Li also attended the event. Afterward, he directly greeted Xiaoyuzhou and said, "Come to my place tomorrow. We need to discuss something." Of course, they first needed to discuss how to come to work. Your tone implies, "Come to work tomorrow. Things can't wait." The next day, Xiaoyuzhou came, and when Xiaoyuzhou arrived, he was a bit flustered. Right away, Robin Li pulled out a non-disclosure agreement, a very professional American startup practice. Signed the NDA first. Xiaoyuzhou signed it. After signing, Robin Li chatted with him. "Let's go back to China. The domestic search engine market is a blank slate. I've been honing my skills at InfoSec for several years. I'm very experienced." The two immediately decided, "Let's do this." Speaking of which, when you often search for unofficial histories, you might find a little anecdote. Another reason Robin Li decided to return to China to start a business was related to Dongmin Ma. At that time, Robin Li lacked ambition. Xiaolei, watch this video clip.
I was living a very happy life in California, USA. Every day, besides my 9-to-5 job, I would plant vegetables and fruits in my backyard garden. One day, I came home and suddenly found all my vegetable garden pulled up, all the vegetables gone. Because my wife thought I lacked ambition and told me to go back to China to start a business.
And so Baidu was born. Doesn't this part feel very much like an unofficial historical account? If he hadn't said it himself, I would have thought someone made it up. But when I found this video, I felt it was a bit strange because I found Robin Li had said completely opposite things elsewhere. So I found the original video. Xiaolei, watch this video again. What? This isn't the original video. Here?
I came home one day to find my vegetable garden completely pulled up. My wife thought I lacked ambition and told me to go back to China to start a business, and that's how Baidu was born. Actually, that's not quite right. It did happen, but the sequence of events is wrong. I first returned to China to start a business. My wife was still in the US at the time, and I'd visit her regularly. One year, when I went to see her, I found all the vegetables had been pulled up. I asked her why, and she said, "You're not here anymore and no one's taking care of them, so I just pulled them out." That's the real story.
Wow, that's a classic example of taking things out of context. So typical. The whole thing is actually about Robin Li talking about a viral song. We should probably play the original clip for everyone. You heard it, right? Isn't it interesting? It's hilarious. And honestly, the previous video spread even wider. People just connect the dots, and you get this subtle feeling that his tone is a bit off, like there's a story behind it. He was actually speaking in that context. But this is truly social media for you. It's such a classic case, there's nothing more to say. Really, nothing more to say. He said it himself. There's video and his mouth movements. What can you say? It's not AI. It's too funny. Anyway, let's continue. Robin Li and Eric Xu went to find some venture capital firms. At that time, Eric Xu was already quite well known in Silicon Valley. Many investors knew him. But during their discussions, everyone had a great impression of Eric Xu, yet they said, "Your company is a tech company, and the technical co-founder is extremely important for this project. Is Robin Li really up to the task?" So, one investor directly asked Robin Li, wanting to test him, "In terms of search technology, who do you think ranks in the top 3 in the entire US?" Robin Li named several people, including his boss, William Chang, but he didn't mention himself. After talking with him, this investor immediately called William Chang, whom he also knew, and said, "This Robin, he's amazing." Robin is Robin Li's English name. What did William Chang say? William Chang was Robin Li's boss, but you can see he got along very well with all his bosses. His bosses were all he was respected. And he was very gracious, because after all, an investor was asking about his own employee who was about to leave, right? William Chang said, "In terms of search technology, Robin Li is definitely in the top 3. Investors were thrilled to hear this. This guy isn't just technically brilliant, he's humble too. Fantastic. In the end, Robin Li and his team secured a total of $1.2 million from 2 venture capital firms. Then, at the end of 1999, Robin Li officially returned to China to start his business. First, the company needed a name. Their company's name comes from Xin Qiji's poem Qing Yu An. Having searched for her 1,000 times in the crowd, suddenly, I turned around, and there she was. In the dim light of the lanterns. The 1,000 times part, Qian Baidu, became Baidu. The logo was actually chosen very deliberately. Many people say it's a dog's paw, but it's not. It's a bear's paw print. Why a bear's paw print? Because hunters typically track prey by following bear paw prints. So, it also conveys the meaning of searching. This story is a little long, isn't it? After returning to China, besides the 2 of them, they started looking for employees. The first key employee was Jiang Guolu, an associate professor at Peking University and deputy director of the Computer Network and Distributed Systems Research Lab. At that time, he was quite famous in China's search engine industry. Earlier, we mentioned that it seemed like China didn't have search engines, but it did. The very first large-scale Chinese English search engine was developed by Jiang Guolu, called Tianwang. It just wasn't a particularly big commercial project. He simply developed the system, and it didn't gain much recognition. Jiang Guolu and Robin Li communicated remotely via email for a long time, getting to know each other. During this time, Jiang Guolu was also evaluating Robin Li. He had long thought that his technology wasn't being fully utilized in academia and could be valuable in the commercial sector. However, for Jiang Guolu, it was still a lot of pressure. He was 35 that year, already an associate professor at Peking University. Leaving meant giving up his established position. Not to mention back then, even today, if you're a 30-something associate professor at Peking University, your family and friends probably wouldn't be particularly supportive of you starting a business. But he gritted his teeth and went for it anyway. It's said that when Robin Li and Jiang Guolu first met, it was like a couple from an online school romance, because they hadn't met in person. They arranged to meet at the west gate of Peking University. What was I wearing? What were you holding? Jiang Guolu was holding a copy of Ziyin, or some magazine anyway. So, they met on the street at the west gate, like a teacher and student. That was their first meeting. Then, the very first Baidu office was in the Peking University Resource Hotel. Initially, Robin Li, to save costs, didn't rent an office building. They started in two ordinary standard rooms, 1,414 and 1,417 in the hotel. At that time, Tsinghua and Peking University already had BBS forums, as we've mentioned before, like Itahu and Shuimu Tsinghua. They recruited on these forums and found quite a few people. Later, when they first started, they already had 7 people. These were the so-called 7 swordsmen of Baidu. Besides Robin Li, Eric Xu, and Jiangguo Liu, there were 4 others. Shan Cui, a graduate student at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Dan Guo, a third-year PhD student at Beijing Jiaotong University. Ming Lei, a graduate student at Peking University. And Xiao Wang, an independent graduate student from Beijing. So it was basically all graduate or PhD students. Shan Cui remembers her interview very clearly. She rode her bicycle from the university for the interview. She remembers Robin Li very clearly, this guy with a gold chain around his neck and a white shirt. At that time, as a graduate student from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, she wasn't short of good job offers, but she was particularly interested in the internet and wanted to give it a try. And so, the company started operating. The earliest company rules were just 2, no smoking and no pets. No smoking is easy to understand, but today, no company would emphasize this rule. But think about the late 90 seconds. Back then, no one cared about indoor smoking. Programmers would often light up a cigarette after finishing their code. So, no smoking. Why no pets? That's because Robin Li himself has bronchitis. He's allergic to pets. These 2 rules are still enforced today. While some internet companies are pet-friendly, at Baidu, to this day, no smoking and no pets have been consistently upheld. Speaking of smoking, there's another funny story. Robin Li really dislikes smoking. The book Searching the Net. Robin Li records this incident. Sheng Bi, a very early, probably the earliest head of marketing, loved to smoke. He found this rule very annoying. Every time Robin Li saw him, he'd put out his cigarette. Sheng Bi would feel terrible. One time at Baidu's annual party, Sheng Bi made a bet with another colleague. Sheng Bi said, "Based on my understanding of Robin, there's absolutely no way I can get him to smoke. If you can get him to smoke, I'll give you 1,000 yuan. The other guy said, "How about 2,000? 2,000 it is." Sheng Bi was so confident. Well, halfway through the annual party, after a few drinks, that employee suddenly knelt in front of Robin Li and pleaded, "Please, just smoke 1 cigarette." Everyone was stunned. Robin Li hated it when others smoked, let alone smoking himself. But with this kind of plea, he didn't say a word, picked up a cigarette, lit it, and genuinely smoked it. Sheng Bi slammed the 2,000 yuan on the table. Later, Sheng Bi found out that Robin Li had secretly arranged with the employee to split the 2,000 yuan. So why did he kneel? It was an unnecessary kneeling. Sheng Bi was quite angry later and told Robin Li, "Boss, if this were during the anti-Japanese war or the Civil War, you'd most likely be a traitor, wouldn't you?" That was an interesting little anecdote from the early days. Back then, company meetings were held in a standard hotel room. It was essentially a heated brick bed, implying a very basic communal space. 7, 8, or even a dozen people would sit cross-legged on the 2 beds in a corner of the room. How did they discuss things? Their goal, of course, was set early on, to develop a Chinese search engine within 6 months. This was truly black room closed-door development working day and night. Jiangguo Liu recalled, "I really miss that period when we were all starting the company together. Everyone focused intently, without distractions, and with firm conviction, working on the same thing. Although it was very tough, we often had meetings at 10 p.m., and overtime would stretch until 2 or 3 in the morning, continuing for a long time. But everyone felt very fulfilled and happy, full of hope. In April 2000, Baidu 1 was developed, capable of searching 5 million web pages. They only took 4 months, significantly ahead of the 6 months they had promised to investors. But Baidu 1 wasn't the usable one that everyone imagines. In fact, like most tech companies at the time, they never even considered doing B2C business. They didn't put this on a website. For example, Lei Ding's earliest email service wasn't a company, it was a public email system. He actually sold the email system to other companies. So, Baidu 1 was just a corporate website, a showroom, and then if clients came, they would provide search technology. That was the business model at the time. Their first client was Silicon Valley Power, a major website that was heavily invested in by VCs back then, having raised over 10 million. After negotiating the partnership, the first order they received was an annual service fee of 80,000 for building an insight search engine for them. How did they get this client? It was a needle in a haystack situation. They shared the same investor who introduced them as brother companies and asked for help. That's how Baidu established its business model. This model, back then, was called ASP, Application Service Provider. You can simply understand it as the future of SaaS. Later, it became known as SaaS, which sounds a bit more modern and is easier to grasp. But initially it was called ASP because there were ISPs, ICPs, and so on, so there was a distinction between these service categories. So the true Baidu 1 first went live on Silicon Valley Power. The first time people used Baidu was also on Silicon Valley Power. At the time, Dan Guo, one of the 7 swordsmen, checked the back-end records during the official launch. What was the very first search query in Baidu's entire history? What was the search keyword? Zhang Qiaoyang skateboarding in front of Tiananmen popped up. The first netizen to use the search engine was surprisingly interested in Zhang Qiaoyang skateboarding in front of Tiananmen. Zhang Qiaoyang was truly famous back then. And if you think about this historical event, it's a clever combination. They were searching for Zhang Qiaoyang, but Zhang Qiaoyang was already from a previous era. The search product they were using was actually a product that replaced portal websites. It's quite surreal. Next, with a successful project under their belt, Robin Li held a grand press conference at the Shangri-La Hotel to announce it. The result was incredibly awkward. There was no internet connection at the venue, so they couldn't do a demo, no internet. The reporters stared blankly for a long time, completely bewildered. What are they demonstrating today? Weren't they prepared? Later, they discovered that when preparing the venue, they had only called the hotel to ask, "Do you have internet?" The hotel said yes, but when they arrived, there was no internet in the actual event space. Who could they blame? As a startup, they lacked experience. Blaming the hotel was too late, but they gritted their teeth and continued to pursue clients. At that time, their target clients. Of course, these were the big websites. Beyond Silicon Valley Power, it was clearly the other major portals, Sohu, Sina NetEase, and China Ren. Soon, a second major client arrived, and it was a buy one, get one free deal, killing two birds with one stone, because Sohu had already acquired China Ren at that time. Additionally, there were other search clients, such as the People's Bank of China, the Financial Information Management Center, CCTV International, and so on. Some of these state-owned enterprises also needed search technology. With clients secured, in September 2000, Baidu received over $10 million in venture capital from DFJ and IDG. Soon, many other major websites like 21CN, Guangzhou WindowNet, Sina263.com, and Tom.com came to discuss partnerships. Baidu's search technology essentially became standard equipment. You can imagine, if websites like Sina and Sohu had too many articles and web pages, it would definitely be inconvenient for users to browse. So, every website needed to be equipped with search technology. Baidu became increasingly famous in China. We're about to move on to the next segment, but before that, let's talk about something. What's the relationship between the hyperlink analysis I just mentioned and Google's PageRank, which many friends probably know as the most famous search engine algorithm? Are they related? Actually, we mentioned this before when we discussed Google in Half Latte. Robin Li's algorithm predated Google's by a full 2 years. If you recall, PageRank, as Google's most important early algorithm and one of the most significant algorithms in internet history, explicitly cited only one article as a reference in its patent application. Robin Li's hyperlink analysis. However, that doesn't mean all search ranking can be explained in a single sentence. The algorithm is actually very complex. So, PageRank also made some different adjustments. For example, it focused more on the quality of web pages rather than just the quantity of citations. In the earliest version of hyperlink analysis, it also focused more on quantity. More citations meant it was good. But PageRank added more weight, meaning if you were cited by a more authoritative person, you'd get more weight, making it a bit more challenging. Additionally, weight would be passed on to... For other linked pages, it became a dynamic value. It would calculate in real time which pages were high or low. Additionally, PageRank better patched some issues and solved special cases, such as the dead-end problem, pages that only receive links but don't link out. Sometimes this would cause problems, and an algorithm would get stuck. You'd need to design something called a damping factor for random surfers, which we won't elaborate on. And you'd also need to solve the infinite loop problem. For example, if I cite Xiaolei, Xiaolei cites a listener, and that listener cites me, our three weights would keep increasing indefinitely, which clearly wouldn't work. So, the algorithm also had to consider these special situations and intricate details. Moreover, the earliest versions of hyperlink analysis and PageRank were, relatively speaking, simpler, and their similarities were higher. They did have some differences, but later on, as the complexity became very high, we know that search engine products further down the line would actually learn from each other and become quite similar. Although I know some friends, especially in recent years, might not emotionally favor Baidu and Robin Li, the search engine he created back then was indeed one of the earliest pioneers. You could say that in that era, everyone was still doing copy to China, imitating and copying Silicon Valley products and models to bring them to China, but Robin Li was always at the forefront. His search technology was still globally leading, it was highly technical, and he started an internet product directly from China 2 years earlier than Google. That's impressive. One more thing to mention is that Robin Li always had a good relationship with his former boss, William Chang. This was his old boss. In 2006, William Chang joined Baidu as chief scientist, but he was never given the CTO title. After that, we didn't hear much about him. I found that he was marginalized and then left Baidu in 2012, and I specifically found Baidu's very first homepage. Baidu's earliest homepage didn't have a search function, it was just a corporate introduction. Many people probably haven't seen this. Take a look. Its earliest red and blue logo was already there, but the website merely introduced what the company did. Are you sure? Yes, that logo back then looked exactly the same as it does now. Exactly the same, it hasn't changed. For that era, the overall design and feel of the website were actually quite good. In the upper right corner, it had that phrase, the one you hear in pre-roll ads, "I've searched for him 1,000 times in the crowd," a nod to Baidu's name. Then the left column included products and services, about Baidu, news center, Baidu product job opportunities, contact us, and so on. On the right, it listed its main clients, Silicon Valley Power, Chaden-Ren bomb disposal expert, and Xiaoyuzhou. These were likely two of their earliest secured clients. And in the middle, there were some recently updated articles like Baidu Power search engines for Sina and Xiaoyuzhou, and what are our products? Another interesting detail was under About Baidu, where there was a section on corporate culture. It contained a passage that, today, might seem a bit tunabu or overly dramatic, but back then it conveyed, how should I put it, a rather simple, idealistic sentiment shared by tech entrepreneurs of that era. The corporate culture statement was completely different from the style we see in internet companies today. It read, "The place where dreams and aspirations begin. All people have aspirations. We are fortunate to live in an era where we can connect our careers with our aspirations. We are equally fortunate that today we have the right to realize our dreams and aspirations. First, ask yourself, what are your dreams and aspirations? Then, ask yourself, will you never give up?" This was quite interesting and very inspiring. It's hard to imagine that a company about to sell search technology to clients would have a corporate culture written like that. All right, having finished our first segment, let's move on to the second. While Baidu was doing ASP, they were also considering whether they could sell more technology and offer another system. What they focused on at the time was CDN technology. CDN technology stands for Content Delivery Network, which includes distributed storage, load balancing, network request redirection, and content management. Does that sound a bit complicated? No worries. Simply put, it's like the pre-positioned warehouses in retail today. Why is shopping so convenient for us? Why can JD.com deliver next day? Because they predict demand, prepare in advance, and have warehouses near you. That's the most important thing. If everyone nationwide had to ship from Beijing, that would be a disaster, wouldn't it? So, it requires various warehouses. Early internet didn't have this technology. If you wanted to access Sina's headquarters, you'd have to pick up goods from Sierchi Haochangkun. That wouldn't work, would it? It wasn't logical. So, server applications in various locations and bandwidth management had to be developed. For example, across the country, you'd have to distribute your goods. And after distributing them, you'd also have to consider, say, if Shanghai's servers were overloaded. Could Hangzhou's be accessed? Ease the load a bit, call upon them, adjust the load. This was actually a bit like managing a highway. In June 2001, Jianguo announced that Baidu's CDN technology was available. Of course, this wasn't the earliest. China's CDN technology was first pioneered by Langshun Communications in 2000, which was the first commercial CDN service provider. What was very important back then, as we mentioned earlier, was why China's internet needed to achieve north-south connectivity and so on. All of that required CDN technology. Otherwise, north-south network connections would be incredibly slow. Now, let's fast forward to the second half of 2001. No flower stays red for 1,000 days. As soon as we reach this point in time, we all know what's coming. In all our stories about the Chinese internet, whenever we hit this point, we know the internet crashed. Forget small websites. Even portal websites were struggling to survive. At that time, Baidu, as a service provider, was already unable to cope with income from just one client. It was only tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even if Baidu completely dominated the market, they had already calculated the ceiling, and it wasn't much. All in all, it was just a market worth tens of millions of dollars. And this market was clearly shrinking. What to do? They had to think of other solutions. Previously, Robin Li had proposed two fundamental laws for search engines. The first was the law of relevance. This was also the core algorithm of search engines, using term frequency statistics for relevance in searches. For example, if you searched for Caffè Breve, and one article mentioned Caffè Breve 10 times while another mentioned it twice, you'd prioritize displaying the first one. That was one logic for ranking. The other was the law of popularity and quality. You couldn't just look at relevance, you also had to consider popularity. If an article was highly relevant, but it just repeated Caffè Breve 100 times, it wouldn't have any real content, would it? You also had to see if the website was cited by others. This was essentially the logic behind hyperlink analysis. These two laws, relevance and popularity, quality, were combined for evaluation. This formed the technical foundation. Then, Robin Li began thinking about commercialization, so he proposed the search engine's third law. Of course, this is a well-known law that remains highly controversial even today, the law of confidence. When you hear law of confidence, it might not immediately click. What does it mean? It means whoever has confidence in their website gets ranked higher. How do you prove you have confidence? More money proves you have confidence. The manifestation of confidence is the willingness to pay for it. So, the content of this law is, if you have confidence in your website and you want to move forward, you can pay to get ahead. Well, this of course is what we now know as paid placement. So these three laws were established very early on. You see, These three laws from 2001 basically formed the core ranking logic foundation of Baidu's search engine right from the start. Of course, the so-called law of confidence and the logic of paid placement behind it wasn't invented by Robin Li. Previously, the American search engine company Overture had already sold the top 5 positions for major keywords for commercialization. Back then, search engine companies could earn $1 billion a year, so it was clear they had to imitate and research this model. The plan was already in motion. Then Robin Li wanted to pivot. He proposed to the board that they completely stop the B2B model. The board was very unhappy, and even Xiaoyuzhou was particularly displeased. It wasn't that they found it unreasonable, but rather that they thought it was unreliable to risk changing the company's direction. You're making money now, and your system is doing quite well, isn't it? Why suddenly pivot to something else? Even walking on 2 legs would be acceptable. The investors said, "We didn't invest in you for this direction." In August 2001, almost everyone at the Shenzhen board meeting opposed him, including Xiaoyuzhou, even his own partner. Robin Li really broke down then. They argued for 3 hours, just kept arguing. After 3 hours, Robin Li suddenly slammed his hand on the table and shouted loudly at the board, "I'm fuff. Hing dan. Nobody's doing anything. Shut the company down, it's trash." Shut the company down. The company would just become trash. He slammed his phone down because it was a conference call, a meeting with the US. Everyone was stunned by this. Because Robin Li, actually, the image we have of him from the outside is quite refined, very mild-mannered. He had always been that way, but suddenly, on this day, he exploded. Even a clay idol has a temper, as the saying goes. Everyone was startled. They had never seen the tech-savvy Robin Li lose his temper like this. As Xiaolei said, "Let's walk on 2 legs then. We'll give you a chance to try it. How about we don't block this path for you?" So, on the 20th of September 2001, the pay-for-placement service officially launched. The slogan back then wasn't, "Baidu knows everything you want to know." The slogan was, "What you want is looking for you." That's quite interesting. Of course, just having pay-for-placement wasn't enough. You needed your own website. That's when Baidu.com officially launched. After this service was launched, initially, it was mostly small websites or small companies that tried it out. For example, Zhangjiajie Tour Guide Network was their first pay-for-placement client, and also Guangdong Jiahong Food. These small companies started trying it, and after purchasing, they found the results were quite good. Because after all, it was just starting. This was the very, very earliest internet. They tried it out, and it was pretty good. 3 mao per click, that was the initial price. By the end of 2001, just a few months later, 800 websites were already purchasing the service, generating 120,000 yuan in revenue. Everyone was very happy then. They gathered in the small office again to discuss. "Let's set a target for next year." Everyone suggested, "Let's be ambitious and aim for 1 million. Robin Li said, "How about we go for 6 million? At the time, everyone just went with 6 million. Different people had different visions. Once the target was set, Robin Li also clearly understood that simply shouting slogans wouldn't work. You really needed a sales team. It's almost laughable. 800 websites brought in 120,000 yuan. Without a sales team, how could you possibly achieve a 6 million yuan target? They had to be proactive. And before that, the 120,000 yuan was all thanks to Xiaoyuzhou running around by himself. He could run himself ragged, talk himself hoarse, but he still couldn't bring in 6 million. In March 2002, Robin Li met Hongbo Zhu, the vice president of Hanpu Management Consulting. Mr. Zhu's main experience was in Xiaoyuzhou Software, which, speaking of it, was also a major IT company in its early days. So he had many years of rich sales experience. He had tried to start his own business for a while, but it hadn't worked out. He seized the opportunity and joined Baidu in May, becoming senior vice president responsible for marketing and sales. This was the foundation of a sales team. With the sales team in place, Baidu also needed to make a name for itself. And then a small incident presented itself. During the Spring Festival of 2002, Sina owed Baidu a quarter's worth of technical service fees, which hadn't arrived. Baidu went to inquire. Sina replied, "Oh, sorry, our finance manager is on her honeymoon. We'll have to delay a bit. It's difficult to process payments right now. Let's talk after the new year." Baidu didn't dare offend a major client, so they waited. After the Spring Festival, Baidu called again. Sina said, "Oh, what a coincidence. Our finance manager is now on maternity leave. She's really giving birth." Hearing this, it was clear they were just making excuses. Looking at the timing, it was obvious Sina was having financial problems. They had no money. This was 2002, after the dot-com bubble burst in 2001. Robin Li was furious when he found out. He said, "Cut off their internet. Suspend their service." A quick note here. It wasn't that Baidu sold the system to them and they copied the code. Baidu was providing support, meaning the servers and everything were still with Baidu. So of course they could just pull the plug and shut them down. At that time, who wasn't struggling financially? Who didn't have cash flow problems? And you're still owing money? At this point, the marketing director, Sheng Bi, whom I just mentioned.
"Cut off their internet. I have a plan."
What did he say? No, Bi, what was the plan? Tell us. On the 12th of March 2002, many reporters received calls from Sheng Bi. He told them, Ladies and gentlemen, tonight at 7 p.m., everyone go to Sina.com and try searching for something in the search bar. When the reporters went online that evening, they found that no matter what they searched for, a line of text appeared. Due to Sina's unpaid bills, Baidu has suspended search services for Sina. For better search results, please visit Baidu.com. This move was truly... You had a point, morally speaking. Even though what you did was a bit aggressive, Sina wasn't entirely in the right either. The next day, articles written by media professionals with headlines like Sina's unpaid bills, Baidu's service suspension were everywhere. Baidu became an overnight sensation, experiencing its first taste of traffic dividends. Before that, who even knew Baidu? Everyone knew Sina and Sohu. Baidu's traffic was only tens of thousands a day. But by riding on Sina's coattails, its reputation suddenly soared. At the time, Sina's vice president Chen Jie, whom we mentioned earlier as the head of the online department, also spoke out. He later said that the issue between Sina and Baidu wasn't due to a finance employee's delay. He claimed Sina had ample funds and wouldn't jeopardize its reputation over such a small amount. This was their response. And then, the media, along with so-called insiders and anonymous sources, all joined the discussion. Some speculated that Sohu also had unpaid bills, but Baidu didn't target them, suggesting a private agreement. Others thought Sina must have offended Baidu in some other way. At that time, all sorts of interpretations emerged. The more it was hyped, the more discussion it generated. Baidu truly reaped the benefits. It just goes to show that traffic is always valuable, no matter the era. These were some of the Wild West tactics of early internet companies, quite rough and tumble. But as the saying goes, fortune may be a harbinger of disaster, and disaster may be a harbinger of fortune. What happened next? While this Sina incident made Baidu famous and seemed like a good thing, Sina was furious. How dare you do this to me? Aren't you publicly humiliating me? So what did they do? In a fit of pique, Sina decided, I'm not working with you anymore. I'll partner with someone else, with Google. Baidu was stunned. Upon looking into it, Robin Li was very aware of Google's strength. Before he returned to China to start his business, InfoSeek was invested in by Disney and later acquired, right? What happened to InfoSeek? It was quickly crushed by Google, essentially wiped out. He knew Google. What Google was doing was almost identical to Baidu. At the time, their partnerships with AOL and Yahoo in the US were legendary. But the question is, since you'd already decided to do this, didn't you anticipate things would eventually fall apart? Perhaps they didn't think too much, just wanted to get famous first. But as the saying goes, fortune may be a harbinger of disaster, and disaster may be a harbinger of fortune, or a blessing in disguise. If Sina hadn't proactively partnered with Google, Robin Li wouldn't have realized so early that Google was still a threat. So, he started preparing in advance, gathering his resolve to confront Google. If setbacks are coming, it's better they come sooner rather than later. Actually, this dispute with Sina made Baidu reflect. As a technical supplier, you're still in the client-facing business. Things might be great when they're good, but your fate is always in someone else's hands. I once heard an industry veteran tell me something along the lines of, using Baidu's service is me doing you a favor. By next year, you'll have to lower your prices for me. This is similar to what Xiaolei has repeatedly talked about, like with BYD's Dillian referring to supplier relationships. The logic is similar. As the client, I have more leverage. I can directly demand a price reduction. Ultimately, Baidu realized they were earning less each year, which was frustrating. So, doing their own pay-for-placement and focusing on a B2C business model was actually more reliable. This was very important afterwards. They stopped charging portal websites service fees. They said, we don't want your money. I'll do it directly for you. Why? Because as a portal website, you directly participate in my pay-for-placement system, and you share the profits with Baidu. This was essentially another wave of promoting pay-for-placement. All of Baidu's commercialization would be done through pay-for-placement. They'd convert it into pay-for-placement advertising fees, almost like taking a stake. In the second half of 2002, even Yahoo, when doing business in China, used Baidu's pay-for-placement. So that's how it gradually took off. Coming back to Google, which we just mentioned, Robin Li saw Google as a huge threat and quickly organized something called the Lightning Plan. Why was it called the Lightning Plan? The person in charge, I wonder if you remember him, was Ming Lei, one of the Seven Swordsmen. Ming Lei, as in thunder and lightning, he was quite meticulous. He was in charge of the Lightning Project, which made perfect sense given his name. You know, maybe our Bandertai team could come up with a Xiaoji plan someday. Why Xiaoji plan? What even is that? Flying down, flowing, flying. Oh, sorry. The Lightning Project from a technical standpoint actually made pretty good progress. Especially because it leveraged Baidu's advantage in China, optimizing Chinese language processing, things like word segmentation and semantic understanding. They did a lot of work. Ming Lei himself was from Peking University. He was involved in the Tianwang system developed by Jiang Guoliu back then, so he was very experienced in this area. After 5 months, Robin Li was like, boom! He was really hard on himself. Ming Lei said, I'm out. Why? Did he go to Google? No, he got an opportunity for an MBA at Stanford. He was going to study abroad. Robin Li was pretty devastated at this point, like, you're doing so well and now you're leaving to study abroad? Of course, from the information I've gathered, my personal feeling is that he had an entrepreneurial dream. He didn't want to just be a technician, just an employee. He wanted to start his own thing after getting an MBA. And later, if you search for information, Ming Lei rarely mentions Robin Li, and Robin Li Gay rarely mentions Ming Lei. It seems there might have been a bit of friction between them, perhaps a less than amicable parting. Robin Li had no choice. Ming Lei was gone, but the Lightning Project still needed to happen. What to do? He had to become the team leader himself, lead the team, and personally take charge. He worked on it for 10 months. After all, he was also from a technical background. The result was that Baidu truly became the most technically advanced search engine in China. It could provide search results in less than 1,000th of a second, offering millions of results. The crawler also indexed pages incredibly fast. Fast indexing means the latest news. As soon as a website published new content, Baidu could quickly find it. Time is money. The technical optimization isn't too hard to understand because of its advantage in Chinese processing. Take the concept of word segmentation I just mentioned as an example. Many times when users search, they're not searching for individual words, they're searching for a sentence. You first need to segment the words. For instance, ping pong ball auction ended. Is it ping pong ball auction ended or ping pong ball auction ended? How would you segment that? Nanjing City Yangtze River Bridge versus Nanjing Mayor Jiang Daqiao. This is also a classic word segmentation example. I remember when I first started grad school, when we were learning about word segmentation, we had to use this case. These are all classic problems. Why? English naturally has word segmentation. Because if it didn't, English would just be a string of letters, written as one long line, the entire article just one continuous string of letters. Once I put it that way, you understand. You'd have to figure out if that S goes with the word before it or after it. Chinese inherently has this problem, which is why word segmentation is needed first. When I was in grad school, working on active translation projects, you had to design the word segmentation. Because translation is a holistic task, you first need to segment the words correctly. If you segment them wrong, you'll obviously translate them wrong. Is it City Mayor or Yangtze River, right? You know, like when we usually listen to some TTS, text-to-speech, many times, Chinese characters with English pronunciation guides get mispronounced. Yes, that's exactly why. Incorrect segmentation. Word segmentation is also the foundational technology for text-to-speech. From its very inception, Baidu had its own corpus. Early on, they used the People's Daily Corpus, which is a classic because the quality of its sentences and text is very high. So they used that, and they continuously built upon it. When I was in grad school, I worked on a sub-project for a corpus involving institutions like Harbin Institute of Technology, Baidu, Tsinghua, Peking University, and others. At the time, I was responsible for crawling a lot of bilingual data, which ultimately went to Baidu for their use. But how much they actually used later, I don't know. Later, when I used Baidu, I felt a little proud, thinking, maybe I contributed to this. But getting back to the point, Jiang Guolu famously declared that it would take competitors at least 2 years to cultivate a team like theirs, because Baidu, focused on Chinese search, had spent a full 4 years on it. This was around 2004, and he certainly had the confidence to say that, though he was still quite humble. The sentiment of when it comes to technology, look at Baidu, was already prevalent back then, and you can see it from some events of the time. For example, in 2006, Baidu announced that it had been officially authorized by the Ministry of Human Resources to establish a postdoctoral research workstation. This made it the first Chinese internet company to have one. There were only 2 supervisors, Robin Li and Jianguo Liu. Speaking of which, the first postdoctoral fellow at this station was Shiqi Zhao, supervised by Robin Li. His previous supervisor was the same as mine, Professor Ting Lu. He was also a senior from our lab. I even have him on WeChat, though we haven't really talked much. He's now the general manager of Baidu Search, and also a Baidu vice president. On the 28th of March, 2003, China Computer Education News launched an event called Baidu versus Google, the battle for search supremacy. It sounds interesting, right? They had users do a blind test to see which results were better. The evaluation lasted a week. Baidu's internal team was a little anxious at the time. Even though they were confident, they thought, what if Google is slightly better or we're just on par? That wouldn't look good. The results came from 10,015 Chinese internet users worldwide. Over 1 week, they used 10,015 zero-search keywords to evaluate the 2 search engines, Baidu and Google. Among them, 10% felt Baidu and Google were pretty similar. For the remaining percentage, take a guess how the other 90% voted. I'll guess a big number. It wasn't 8-1, no. It was more like 35% of people chose Google as better, while 55% chose Baidu. So, not a complete landslide, but still nearly a 2-fold difference. This really showed that at the time, Baidu's quality and standards in Chinese search were genuinely very high. Baidu was also quite innovative back then. On the 7th of November 2002, Baidu even launched a small game, Baidu Search Tycoon, that you played using the search engine. So, within the game, Baidu set up a lot of small questions. They were incredibly diverse, strange, and very niche. They were much more obscure than anything you'd find in a game like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. If you didn't use a search engine, you'd basically have no chance of knowing the answers. For example, China's first subway line, Beijing Line 1, in which month of 1969 did it open? Or Hong Kong Phoenix satellite TV anchor Liu Haro suffered a major car accident in the UK, her life in critical condition. Through which Beijing hospital and in which month was she treated and stabilized? So, you had to search. If you found the answer, you had a chance to win prizes like mobile phones, computers, and cameras. Didn't that perfectly highlight the value of a search engine? And it was true. There were prizes every day, every week, every month, every season. The cheapest prize was a t-shirt and the most expensive seasonal prize was a car. You guessed it. Giving away cars was very popular back then. In February 2003, Wang Wenbo, a student from Peking University, won a Geely car, and Robin Li himself presented the award. That was a huge internet news story at the time. And who won the car in the second season? Tomorrow? No, it couldn't be Tsinghua, because, as I just said, the first winner was from Peking University. At the time, everyone speculated, look, the first winner was from Peking University, so the second one probably has to be Tsinghua University, someone with a high degree and good academic background. It was like they were lining up for prestige. But when the winner came on stage, it turned out to be an ordinary farmer from Debeiwu Village, Longwantun Town, Shunyi District, Beijing. He said, I dare to use a search engine. This isn't a Beijing dialect, but he'd search for things like livestock disease number 4 or livestock disease number 5. We don't really understand those, but now it's much simpler. Just search on Baidu and you quickly know what's going on. He said, I just played around casually, originally hoping to win a t-shirt. Look, I ended up winning a car. Look at this. I'm almost embarrassed. Next time I sell pigs, I can use this car to transport them. That was also big news at the time, quite a sensation. By 2002, what was the final sales figure for Baidu's pay-for-placement ads? Earlier, we mentioned Baidu's pay-for-placement was supposed to be 6 million. The final figure was 5.8 million. That's quite impressive. Still pretty accurate. If you were to look at the very first version of the Baidu homepage, which most people probably haven't seen, it still had a left-right structure. The left side featured its logo and slogan, while the right side contained its content. The entire left third was dedicated to its slogan, while the right 70% of the page, for that era, was relatively simple compared to those complex portal websites. It had just a few main hyperlinks. World Cup, flowers, Yumingfu, translate, games, mobile, just the most crucial keywords placed there. This prevented new users, total beginners, from being unable to get started after opening the site. After a few searches, you'd roughly know how to use it. But Xiaolei, that statement was premature. By the second half of 2002, the website suddenly became complicated. It essentially reverted to the portal website approach, stuffing it with a huge amount of content. It was like they piled up all the prompt words and categories. Computers and internet, education and employment, business and economy, entertainment and spirituality, sports and fitness, life, services, healthcare, travel, and transportation, and so on. It was essentially like they put all the directories back up for you. It was put back up. By 2003, it became simpler again. Now, there's another point. We just talked about sponsored search as a very important commercial product. Another equally important commercial product was also introduced at this time, called Baidu Union, or the Baidu Website Alliance. The basic idea was that websites could place Baidu's search box anywhere on their site. Traffic directed from your website could earn you a share of Baidu's sponsored search revenue. It was essentially a traffic exchange and channel revenue sharing model. We have similar things today, like influencer commissions. You help me sell my goods, and I'll give you a cut. That's roughly the idea, except this was in 2002, very early on. It was quite similar to Google AdSense, which is why many people ask if Baidu copied Google. But just like Baidu's search algorithm and information display predated Google's, Baidu Union also predated Google's advertising network system. Google only launched theirs in 2003. Baidu's innovative capabilities back then were truly impressive. This was probably very important for Baidu, but it was also crucial for many traffic owners and advertisers. At that time, many advertisers wanted to place ads but had nowhere to put them, which sponsored search solved. But for many traffic owners, people running websites, if your site already had a lot of traffic, if you were a big webmaster, how would you monetize it? You weren't earning a dime. And if you tried to build your own advertising system, you didn't have the resources of Asina or Sohu. What could you do? You could simply integrate Baidu's ad plugin, and suddenly you'd have income. For example, Mop.com joined Baidu Union in 2013. Its founder mentioned that Mop's collaboration with Baidu lasted only 1 year, but Mop's idle ad spaces were all converted into their due commercial value, accounting for about 10% of Mop's total revenue that year. This was quite a significant piece of the pie. While developing Baidu Union, Baidu also did something major, and this event is connected to one person. In May 1999, something happened in Xingning, Guangdong. Li Xingping, born in Xingning, Guangdong, was an internet cafe administrator. He came from a farming family, with only a junior high school education. After graduating from junior high, he didn't have much to do, so he went to work as a net cafe manager, spending his days playing games and surfing the internet. He keenly observed that every time people came online, they'd ask, "Hey, net manager, what websites are good online? What sites can I visit? Any recommendations?" Li Xingping would say, How about you go to Sohu? S-O-H-U, right? He started collecting these because he was asked so often. As he collected them, he'd jot them down in a small notebook, thinking, can I just organize a web page for you all to look at? It's too much trouble for you to ask me every time. I'll give you a direct snapshot. And if I put this website online, wouldn't everyone be able to see it? This was such a fundamental unmet need, and his idea at the time was truly outside the fifth ring road for that era. Because if you asked Zhang Chaoyang or Wang Jidong to think of this demand, they wouldn't have been able to. The people surrounding them were already inundated with online content every day. They always had specific destinations in mind. Yes, I know so many websites. I interact with internet users daily, but those new to the internet, how would they know these URLs? How would they get to know these first-tier city people like you? This was the earliest outside the fifth ring road demand. So Li Xingping put all these major websites onto his own site, making it look like a portal. But the biggest difference between his site and a typical portal was that it was only times a URL navigation site. Other websites, when you clicked on them, would lead to their own content, right? He just provided a microcosm of links. He also found a URL, how123, that even the least educated person, someone who didn't understand English or anything, could type in very easily. So he was the earliest. He was truly the pioneer. Many friends must have used how123. At that time, how123 caught the attention of Kai Wensheng. We mentioned earlier that Kai Wensheng was involved in the domain name business and made money from various websites. He keenly noticed that one particular website was getting half of its traffic from a single source. It was being directed to him. He looked into how123 and pondered, maybe I should buy this. Then he spoke to his own technical staff because he had them too, right? His tech team said, that's simple, we can just build our own, why buy it? So, he created 265, which became another very well-known URL navigation site. Later, IDG came to invest. They approached how123 first, but Li Xingping refused because he was self-sufficient and even quite profitable. Why would I take your funding? He thought. So, they approached Kai Wensheng, who agreed. But after agreeing, Kai Wensheng also suggested, why don't we merge with how123? I'll go talk to him. If you can't convince him, I will. He tried, but Li Xingping refused again. So, 265 had no choice but to go it alone. It was at this moment that the gears of destiny truly began to turn. If Li Xingping had agreed earlier, history would have taken a different path, right? He was absolutely determined not to sell. Then, in July 2004, China launched its first large-scale crackdown on adult websites. Before that, adult websites could be accessed freely. Both 265 and how123 were implicated because some links on their sites, when opened, clearly led to other things. Even if their own sites didn't host such content, they were certainly considered navigation points to it. So they were both shut down directly. Li Xingping was in great distress. What could he do? He had no choice but to ask Baidu for help. Why ask Baidu for help? Because a full 30% of Baidu's traffic came from how123. Without how123, Baidu would have had no traffic at all. Just imagine how important how123 was back then. Of course, Baidu's people stepped in to find a solution. I haven't found details on how they solved it, but Baidu did resolve it, and how123 was back online. Then they casually asked, hey old man, are you selling? Are you selling this website? This time, Li Xingping realized this monkey was too hard to raise, and he sold it. Yongshu personally handled the negotiations. Li Xingping ultimately received 10 million RMB in cash and 2 million worth of stock, though that 2 million in stock later became far more valuable. Baidu's acquisition of how123 was monumental. It was like having its own portal website. I don't need to produce content, Baidu thought, but I've now controlled a very important entry point to the internet. At the time, it even reached a point where if you wanted to use Baidu, you wouldn't type baidu.com. You'd type how123.com and then use Baidu in its search box. Many people wouldn't go directly to Sina, they'd go to how123 first, because how123 was the default browser homepage. Everything opened from there. It was dominant. Baidu thought, look, now I have both search and navigation. Search and navigation are two ways to find websites, and they were becoming increasingly mainstream. Besides searching, there was navigation. Both major gateways were now in my hands. It was already hinting at a monopoly back then. Internet information was basically inescapable from Baidu. At that time, Tencent and Alibaba weren't particularly influential. They were completely overshadowed by Baidu. This was arguably Baidu's most successful acquisition, perhaps the only one of its kind. Of course, as we know, the outcome for how123 later on isn't hard to imagine, because people no longer really needed this kind of website navigation. The sheer number of websites was one factor, and then mobile internet completely changed the landscape. People didn't need websites anymore. But getting back to Baidu, the following years saw smooth development, and sponsored search revenue soared. Baidu Union also performed very well. By the end of 2003, the winter was over, and it was time to consider one thing: going public. We'll cover that in the next episode. Before that, let's briefly mention Ming Lei. Didn't we mention earlier that he was one of the 7 swordsmen, the head of the Lightning Project, who went to get his MBA? After finishing, from our perspective, did he perhaps miss out? The opportunity to become a core figure of an internet giant? Absolutely. But it's also a case of a blessing in disguise, a misfortune in disguise. It's like the old saying, a loss of a horse, a gain of a horse. After he finished his studies and became an MBA, he returned to China in 2005. Like Robin Li, he started his own business from scratch. At that time, he discovered a huge demand in the music market and decided to give it a try, founding Kuo Music. 2 years later, Kuo Music's users exceeded 100 million, and it was consistently among the top 3 in China's music market. Later, after several twists and turns during the copyright wars, it was eventually sold to Tencent. Currently, it's part of Tencent Music Entertainment Group, TME, which is still very impressive. He successfully landed ashore. Although it was mentioned earlier that stories of their entrepreneurial period rarely featured each other, there was news in 2016. Ming Lei returned to Baidu to become the CEO of Baidu Ventures, primarily focusing on AI investments. Another title for Ming Lei is that he established the Artificial Intelligence Innovation Center at his alma mater, Peking University. He also teaches AI courses at both Peking University and Tsinghua University. He's considered a veteran in the internet industry. His courses are flagship courses. Since we've mentioned Lei Ming, let's also talk about those who are still working at Baidu. From what I found, it seems only Shan Shui is still there. Ming Lei seems to have left again later, but I haven't found the exact date. Shan Shui returned after leaving in 2010 for over 7 years. She is currently the Secretary General of Baidu's Culture Committee, responsible for organizational culture building. This means that in 2010, only Robin Li remained from the original flagship class. Others came and went, and now only Shan Kui is left. Many others are either starting their own businesses or investing. This is also interpreted by many as Baidu having relatively low stability among its executives. Many former Baidu VPs also came and went. Low stability essentially turned it into a Whampoa military academy. Compared to Tencent and Alibaba, many of the founding members are still with those two companies, which are very stable. Of course, another perspective is that Baidu doesn't give its executives as much room. Robin Li, with his technical background, might have a stronger desire for control, and some people might find it difficult to work with him. This is just one theory, perhaps for reference. Speaking of which, some friends might recall the previous 2 episodes when we talked about Sohu. Sohu's relatively relaxed environment, yes, made it easier for entrepreneurs to emerge, right? Now for the 3rd installment. On the 3rd of November, 2003, by Westlake, several internet entrepreneurs gathered to begin their forum. Let's see who has achieved more. They were SoftBank President Masayoshi Son, Tom Online President Wang Lailai, Shanda CEO Chen Tianqiao, Ichnet CEO Yibo Shao, Baidu President Robin Li, Trip CEO Jiancheng Liang, and Alibaba CEO Jack Ma. All of them were industry leaders. This was Robin Li's first time participating in the forum. Who attended each year actually reflected the changing status of these figures in the industry during those years. You can also look up the changes over these sessions. As we mentioned before, initially it was mostly the bosses of portal websites, but now it had shifted to Tianqiao Chen, Yibo Shao, Robin Li, and Jianzhang Liang. And the forum only ran for 6 years. If you exclude the 6th session, it was really only 5. Why exclude the 6th? Because it was too perfunctory. The people invited didn't really have much to do with the internet. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor of California, Chuanzi Liu, and Shufu Li were there. Of course they are entrepreneurs, but not from internet companies. Many internet entrepreneurs later stopped attending such events, which is understandable. In the early days, it was a small circle where everyone gathered to discuss how China's internet should develop. But later, as the industry entered a very harsh and severe competitive environment, everyone became more self-interested, and that atmosphere disappeared. However, at this 4th session of the forum, everyone was very low-key. Nothing was really announced publicly, and many reports only came out much later. Why? Because these companies were basically all considering going public. As we mentioned, 2004 arrived, and the entire capital market heated up again. In June, Baidu announced that 8 venture capital firms, including DFJ, one of the top 3 venture capitalists in the US, invested $14.7 million in Baidu. In September, Zhansheng Wang, who had worked at PwC for 10 years, officially became Baidu's CFO. On August 19th, Google's stock soared on its Nasdaq debut, also in 2004. Because Baidu wanted to do its own marketing at that time, it also shot a nonsensical commercial. It was truly absurd, but you could see the vibe of ads from back then. I actually quite like these crazy ads. Let's take a look. Oh my goodness. I won't play this ad for you because you wouldn't understand what's going on just by listening. I'll try to describe it. It's really nonsensical. It's basically a film crew, well, not a film crew, but in a place like Hengdian, a famous film studio, they're trying to portray Meng Jiangnu crying down the Great Wall. But the actress playing Meng Jiangnu couldn't cry. What to do? They tried all sorts of methods, but she still couldn't cry. They had her chop onions, chop chili peppers, and finally, somehow, she started crying. And she cried so much that the entire city was flooded. The last line was, "This traffic is truly immense." It's extremely nonsensical. The punchline is entirely at the end. The tears were just gushing out. Yes, the tears were gushing out at the end. It's probably the fire hose just gushing water, okay? Everything we've discussed so far, whether it's building the CFO's team or doing marketing and advertising, these are all relatively basic operations. Next, there's still a troublesome, dirty, and arduous task that needs to be resolved. In July 2004, an article titled "God is Fair, He Only Gives Each of Us One Life" appeared. It was written by Daisen, the head of Guangzhou Zhuang Company. Zhuang was a Baidu channel partner. Daisen's article essentially said that Baidu, without any warning, suddenly revoked Zhuang's right to open accounts for new clients. Because Zhuang was an agent, and it hadn't received any notification from Baidu about the first batch of agents or regional core agents in Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing. Isn't this just killing the donkey after it's done its job? Plus, we had a contract, and it wasn't due to expire until the end of the year, so there were still 6 months left. Let's provide some background. At that time, Baidu's bidding system was very popular and a highly profitable business. There were many channel partners, and it was extremely lucrative for these agents to help open accounts. Some even said that if you became a regional core agent when Baidu announced them, it was like winning a multi-million-dollar lottery. What kind of accounts were they helping to open? Client accounts, developing clients. Yes, account IDs. By opening accounts through me, I earned money, just like with a bank account. As I just mentioned, this was for Baidu's bidding system, for Baidu bidding clients. What kind of account did you want to open? It involved a large number of agents. My understanding is that the commission rates were relatively high, and the customer traffic was also very large. With such a large scale and agents making a lot of money, problems were inevitable. For example, there were some chaotic situations where a client would give an agent a 3,000 yuan prepayment, but the agent would only deposit 2,000 yuan with Baidu. What about the remaining 1,000 yuan? It's a prepayment. You don't need it now, so I'll just take it and spend it myself. These kinds of problems were rampant. It was discovered that some operations were non-compliant. This non-compliance wasn't necessarily intentional or malicious, but it served as a reason to shut it down anyway. However, the shutdown wasn't handled well. There was a lack of communication and explanation, leading to communication issues, and the matter quickly escalated. Agents were criticizing Baidu. If you alienated all these agents, Baidu's business couldn't expand effectively. At that time, the conflict between both sides was extremely tense. It took a long time to ease and resolve the issue. By February 2005, Baidu acquired one of Shanghai's largest agents, a company called Qilang. Its general manager, Xiang Hailong, was very young, having started his business in his third year at East China Normal University and doing exceptionally well. Qilang directly became Baidu's Shanghai branch, and Xiang Hailong became the general manager for Shanghai. This acquisition happened because of his excellent agency work. Later, Beijing also experienced some problems, and starting in 2007, Hailongxiang concurrently served as the general manager of the Beijing branch. A few months later, Hailongxiang became Baidu's vice president. You can understand how quickly he rose to become the national sales head. Finally, with a proper sales head in place, Baidu subsequently managed all its agents through regional sales management mechanisms. The days of just open an account for me, and I'll give you X amount, were largely over. It wasn't about how to split commissions with you, but rather that Baidu now had a highly hierarchical, or at least a very standardized and well-regulated system in place with clear rules. On the 5th of August 2005, Baidu was listed on NASDAQ. The opening price was $66, and the closing price that day was $122. Baidu's market value reached $3.958 billion. The highest intraday gain was 354%, ranking 18th in US. IPO history for overall increase. Baidu's IPO overshadowed all previous Chinese internet listings, making them pale in comparison. Baidu created 7 billionaires, 50 multimillionaires, and 240 millionaires. Robin Li became one of the most famous figures in the global internet industry. Even Jack Ma said at the time that Robin Li and Baidu had truly earned China's respect and reputation in the global internet sphere, especially in the U.S. Also in the same year, the slogan "Baidu it, and you'll know" appeared. With Baidu's IPO, the rapid expansion of its business, and the increasing number of Chinese internet users, this slogan became known to everyone. This was Baidu's first phase. In the later part of this phase, it became a leading enterprise in China's internet industry, and not just by relying on search. Now, let's introduce another key figure. In 1997, Junyu graduated from Tongji University with a degree in chemistry. He worked in chemistry-related roles at several large companies. Outside of work, his personal hobby and greatest interest was researching search engines. He absolutely loved search engines. He even built his own personal website called Search Research Institute. He also used a username, Search Engine 9238, to discuss with people on various forums. Gradually, search engine 9238 became quite well known. Everyone said there was a netizen 9238 who really understood search, and people were eager to discuss search engines with him. He actually found an opportunity to work on a search engine early on with Zhou Hongyi's 3721, but 3721 was fundamentally at odds with the logic of a search engine. It was based on Chinese real names. We'll elaborate on this when we talk about Xiaoyuzhou later. You can probably understand that Xiaoyuzhou at the time believed that when you typed things like Sina, which were English inputs, you should be able to directly search for Sina and have Sina.com appear. He thought Chinese real name keywords should directly correspond to a specific website. He created a service called one-step access. So it was a real name service, which was slightly at odds with a traditional search engine. After Yujun realized Zhou Hongyi's approach was quite different, he decided to leave. Zhou Hongyi told him, "Go to Sina. I know people there. You can try it out." So he went to Sina. After arriving, he found that Sina wasn't suitable for search engines either. It was a portal site, and much of its search functionality was still outsourced to Baidu. It just so happened that Baidu and Sina were having a falling out at the time. He thought about it and realized he still needed to go to Baidu. You're not pulling your weight. Xiaoyuzhou specifically wrote about this in his autobiography, saying it was a great pity he couldn't keep Junyu. Looking back, it truly was a huge missed opportunity. At the time, he completely failed to recognize how important search engines would become. Didn't he also get into search engines later? But that was much later, so how did he end up at Baidu? At that time, Junyu wrote what is arguably the most famous self-recommendation letter in internet history. It was incredibly popular back then. The self-recommendation letter read, "Search engine 9238 male, 26 years old, Shanghai native, Tongji University Chemistry Department, 5-year program. Well-read and well-traveled. Long-term desire to enter the search engine industry, but frustrated by lack of entry points. Extremely anxious, hence this letter. If any company wishes to build the best Chinese search engine, I sincerely volunteer for the opportunity. I am obsessed with search. As long as it's related to search, I don't care about 1. Location, whether it's north or south, through fire or water. 2. Position high or low, first tier or second tier, as long as it's search related. 3. Salary as long as it covers basic living expenses in the local area, that's the bottom line. 4. Work intensity, I'm already used to a 14-hour workday anyway. Oh wow. This was such a sincere letter, truly from a search fanatic with a pure heart. This letter alone so impressed Baidu that they hired him. At that time, the role of product manager didn't even exist. They gave him the title of product marketing manager, essentially placing him in the marketing department. His task was to research user needs and, from a marketing standpoint, figure out how to develop products. This was May 2001, and Baidu only had just over 30 employees. Back then, his colleagues' impression of Yujun was that when everyone went to eat at 10 a.m., he'd still be sprawled out, sleeping there. Why? He pulled another all-nighter. He often stayed up so late that he'd just sleep on the sofa instead of going home or to his rented place. He was simply obsessed with search. During the Lightning Project, Junyu was already there. He was solving many of the main product issues, fixing numerous small bugs in search products, and developing many small features. He gradually moved up, eventually overseeing almost all products. Because I was previously on teacher Junyu's team, he once recalled to me that back then, there weren't such complex power struggles, nor was there any question of who was in charge. There simply weren't any product managers at all. The entire market lacked product managers. Unlike today, where there isn't enough cake to go around and too many people for too few resources, back then, they were overwhelmed. So many product-related tasks naturally fell to him. By the end of 2003, Junyu was the director of product marketing. Just a year and a half later, in mid-2005, Junyu became Baidu's chief architect. From 2005 onwards, he reported directly to either the CEO or the second-in-command. His reporting lines included Robin Li, Hongbo Zhu, Jiangguo Liu, and Yinan Li. Except for Yinan Li, all the others I've mentioned were among the core leadership. While responsible for web search, Junyu discovered that search was becoming more specialized. There was a category of search keywords that were particularly concentrated, such as images and news. These were major areas, with many people coming online to search for all sorts of images. In July 2003, Baidu launched Baidu News and Baidu Images. This was essentially taking these specific search objects, isolating them, and creating dedicated search engines for them. This is easy to understand. They were distinct categories. Next, they discovered many people were searching for music. Initially, the idea was to acquire an existing music search product on the market, but negotiations fell through, so they decided to build one themselves. They created a product with a very clean interface, aggregating music from various websites. It had deduplication. You certainly couldn't repeatedly offer the same music file when searching, so deduplication was essential. Then there was removing dead links, links that couldn't be accessed or downloaded. It also allowed format selection and lyric search. That's when Baidu MP3 was born. It was incredibly important, and it's an old memory for many. Back then, when you wanted to download music, you'd just search for it online. When MP3s first became a thing, where do you remember downloading them from? For me, I downloaded them from here. This was incredibly popular back then. Many people went online just to search for songs. Baidu MP3's traffic once exceeded web search by 20%. Can you believe it? Everyone went directly to search Baidu MP3. Demand exploded. In May 2006, Baidu also launched Music Master, which simply put allowed users to create and share their own playlists. This was years ahead of Xiaomi and other web music services. This was back in 2006. Of course, at that time, when we were doing this, we all thought and understood that there wasn't much concept of copyright. Even though those MP3s weren't hosted on Baidu's own servers, they were hosted on other websites and they were still pirated. Later, after music copyright became a serious issue, the music landscape changed and people stopped downloading from Baidu MP3. Yujin's masterpiece arrived in June 2003. At that time, Baidu's main search, they usually called web search, Dasu, big search. Next to Dasu, there was a small product called Information Express. What did this product do? Users could post small pieces of information. How to explain it? Like those small classified ads in newspapers, they just moved them directly to Baidu search. Users could post directly next to your search results, and it would just list everything in order. Something like that. Yujin really disliked it, feeling it had no user value because the information was too messy and abundant, and you couldn't gauge its quality, right? It just piled up there. But other bosses at Baidu liked it, so it couldn't be taken down. Finally, everyone got together to discuss the tofu block issue again, whether to keep it or not. Yujin said at the meeting, "All right, if we're going to do it, let's do it well. Let's not just pile it up like these tofu blocks, right? That's useless. Let's pull it out separately and create sections. You can't just say anyone can upload anything there now." It just piled up there, and when people tried to view or browse the content, there was no efficiency whatsoever. It was just divided into category 1, 2, 3. At the same time, he also drew inspiration from a product, seen in News's comment sections. We all understand that a news article might have a comment section below it. But Sina News did something different. It connected comment sections under the same topic. For example, if 10 articles were all about the Olympics, everyone would chat in one single comment section. Wouldn't that allow everyone to communicate more effectively with a better grasp of the overall discussion? It was a reverse thinking concept. At the same time, Yujin also had confidence from Baidu MP3. Why? Because MP3s had a very high concentration. He found that searches for celebrities like Jay Chou and Andy Lau were enormous, and users were easily gathered. Since you're going to create sections, I can leverage this traffic to first create sections and pull out their main topics. At the end of 2003, Baidu Tieba launched, becoming one of the most important content products in the Chinese internet. Here it is. In terms of format, Baidu Tieba was quite similar to a BBS. People would post, and a single post could be bumped to the top or something like that, right? Its biggest feature was its extremely low barrier to entry. Its Tieba distribution logic was incredibly powerful. In principle, it allowed for infinite segmentation. Traditional BBS platforms had manually divided sections, and each section had its own atmosphere. The section moderator would determine the vibe, and the section was basically fixed with rules and a chain of command. If you wanted to open a new section, you had to consult the webmaster. A BBS needed a unified top-down management approach. But partitioning by keywords, that was Baidu Tieba's earliest name, keyword partitioning. Or was it community? It wasn't even called Baidu Tieba at first. And the most ingenious part about partitioning by keywords was that users naturally completed the partitioning process as they expressed their needs. Of course, creating a Tieba yourself is another matter. But when you search, say for Jay Chou, and you find many people discussing Jay Chou there, you naturally enter. You didn't have to first learn about Shuimu Qinghua BBS, then find a celebrity zone, and within the celebrity section, maybe there's a specific discussion for Jay Chou, or something like that. I didn't have to overcome such a high barrier. Instead, I could directly see these posts and directly participate in discussions. More flatter. People could just naturally start chatting. And what's crucial is that you didn't need to acquire new users. If you were the webmaster of Shuimu Qinghua, where would you get new users? Wouldn't you have to advertise? Wouldn't you have to find people? Wouldn't you have to promote it? With such massive organic traffic from Baidu, it just happened naturally, and it was demand-driven. Even why paid search rankings worked so well was because they were demand-driven. When I searched for something, and you gave me a relevant ad result, it was definitely more efficient than traditional subway ads, right? So, this kind of segmented, categorized, BBS truly revolutionized the efficiency of information dissemination compared to traditional BBS platforms. Furthermore, Baidu MP3 was indeed key to launching Baidu Tieba. The earliest Tieba users were those searching for music, and they were particularly high quality. These people didn't come to discuss topics that easily led to arguments. They talked about a single celebrity, a celebrity everyone liked. And the fact that it was segmented was also very important. If you had a BBS called Celebrity Forum, fans of Jay Chou and Stephanie Sun might argue, but here, everything was already categorized. So, the community atmosphere was great. You'd search for music, enter Tieba, and naturally, the entire community vibe was established by these early music enthusiasts. That's why Tieba's cultural atmosphere later on was also very good. Early seed users are incredibly important. I found a list of popular Tieba discussion sections from 2003, and you'll see they were truly diverse, covering everything imaginable. For example, under the entertainment category, there were movie forums, music forums, gaming forums, novel forums, image forums, beauty forums, anime and cartoon forums, joke forums, celebrity forums for Andy Lau, Jay Cho, Ado, Jackie Chung, Nicholas Tse, Ruby Lin, sports forums for football, basketball, NBA, table tennis, badminton, tennis, swimming, F1, computer and internet forums for hardware, programming, hacking, network security, search engines, culture and science forums for literature, photography, art, calligraphy, lifestyle and leisure forums for dating, travel, mobile phones, health, food, education and employment forums for postgraduate entrance exams, general exams, Gaokao National College entrance exam, studying abroad, theses, universities, and regional forums like Beijing forums, Shanghai forums, Asia forums, Beijing forums from around the world, Taiwan forums, other domestic forums like Taiwan, Taiwan Dinging forums, Taiwan Open in China forums, and even just Taiwan forums.
Asia forums, Asia forums.
Asia forums, table tennis, badminton sports, Go Research Labs, headphones, human nature, happiness, socializing, general sports, shipping. The internet then became a method for fostering a warm and interactive environment. Even if you just mentioned podcast, enthusiasts might search for them, and after searching, they'd say, I'll go into Tieba, post a few threads. And after posting more in those threads, perhaps even the podcaster would join in to interact with everyone. This was a very common phenomenon on the internet back then. Of course, some oddities also appeared. It was quite interesting back then. A stone pier forum emerged, and people discussed stone piers, even coming up with creative activities. For example, there was the first stone pier photography contest to see who could take the best photos. Oh, and here's a fun fact. Among all the animal forums on Baidu Tieba, there's only one animal that doesn't have its own forum. Chicken. That's quite reasonable, very reasonable. And it's because of this meme that some people started calling Baidu Duniyang Baidu Girl. This personification of Baidu as Duniyang came about because it didn't have a male counterpart, you see? So that's the logic. I honestly didn't know that was the original reasoning. So what was the original story with Duniyang? Duniyang, this is actually a meme that looking at it today is a bit adult-oriented, but that's how it originated. Tieba culture also gave birth to many interesting things. People are unearthing early stories, and there are many fun ones. For example, in the Ghost Blows Out the Light Tieba, everyone was eagerly waiting for updates. When they didn't come, it was frustrating. One netizen said, I'll write some fanfiction myself, and wrote 7-star Lu Palace. This later became The Lost Tomb, which thousands urged for updates, and it even became more popular than Ghost Blows Out the Light. Before, in Tieba, there was also a question. The first master of Chinese sci-fi is Yang Quanren. Who has read his works? Yang Quanren refers to Xixin Liu, not Robin Li. Then someone replied, a user named ShipShip. He said, I know him. I studied in Beijing at Tsinghua and Peking University. I had 2 face-to-face meetings and discussions with him, and the atmosphere was incredibly lively. He then added another comment also by him, saying, I've only seen full-spectrum jamming online, which describes a full-scale war between China and NATO. It's very realistic and shocking. Did this person actually fight in a war? Who is this ShipShip? It's Cixin Liu himself. You mentioned this before. It's hilarious, his own alt account. What's the most famous Baidu Tieba? The biggest one. That would be D8, founded in 2004. D8 is a nickname. Its original name was Li Yi Bar, named after the footballer Li Yi, Emperor Li Yi. That's because in 2005, Li Yi said in an interview, my ball protection is like Henry's, which led to widespread mockery. People started saying, don't call him Li Yi, call him the Emperor, because King Henry was Henry's nickname. As a result of this mockery, D8 slowly transformed into a bar for deconstruction and parody, a collective carnival. People didn't genuinely believe Li Yi was an emperor, but he is the emperor, became a universally recognized meme. This is similar to what we discussed when talking about BBS, that kind of insider knowledge where those who know. This culture gradually emerged in Tieba. In June 2007, 2 major bars, Li Yuchun Bar and Li Yi Bar, clashed. At the time, there was a saying, D8 goes on an expedition, not a blade of grass remains, and Baoba. What does Baoba mean? It means making a Tieba unusable. Within 3 hours, 100,000 posts appeared, adding 1,900 pages. With over 1,000 pages, you couldn't even scroll through to find normal discussions, you couldn't see anything. It was all spam, completely messed up and chaotic by the opposing side. The Tieba was effectively ruined. So, D8 goes on an expedition, not a blade of grass remains also became a famous saying. Much later, in 2016, they even expeditioned to Facebook to attack Tsai Ing-wen and other Taiwan independence forces. These are all very well-known events. There's also another quite famous bar called Ruoji Bar, Idiot Bar. These are also classic sayings and witty remarks from some of the netizens of Ruoji Bar, some insider jokes that were compiled there. Whether you're happy or not, reading them can make you even happier. Some classic memes that came out of Tieba, for example, the term Diaosi loser, underdog, definitely originated from D8. Oh, I see. Originally, D8 was self-deprecating. It came from discussions among netizens. D8 had a significant impact on us. It referred to losers, you know? I feel like it came out around 2011 to 2012. On the 16th of July 2009, in the Baidu Tieba World of Warcraft bar, an anonymous netizen posted a thread titled Jia Junpeng, "Your mom wants you to come home for dinner." The body of the post only had 2 letters. RT. RT means as per title, which is what you write when you're too lazy to type out the main content and just use the title. Many people posted like this. In just 5 to 6 hours, this post quickly garnered millions of views and hundreds of thousands of replies. Everyone spread it like crazy, saying, "Jia Junpeng, your mom wants you to come home for dinner. Help spread it so he sees it quickly." And why was this a cultural phenomenon? Because it was completely nonsensical. It had no specific target, utterly random. At the time, many people replied, "Jia Junpeng, have you gone crazy playing games? Don't play at the internet cafe. Go home for dinner." Others pretended to be his classmates, saying, "We're about to clear a dungeon. He'll go home after we finish. Tell his mom not to worry." Some even pretended to be his dad, saying, "Don't listen to your mom. We'll eat out tonight. Just us two." The culture quickly fermented. Many particularly interesting posts from that time are preserved in Tieba. I was actually laughing out loud while collecting them just now. For example, one post asked, "When does a person give up on someone they really like?" Below, a netizen replied, "Nothing special. Just had my mom's pork rib soup for lunch, hung out with friends all afternoon, came home, looked at the unreplied chat window, and suddenly felt they weren't that important anymore. This was quite touching." Then someone replied, "What about tonight?" Meaning, do you still miss them tonight? And the guy replied, "Ate dry pot chicken tonight." Yeah, I really don't want to anymore. Yeah, I really don't want to anymore. This is also a legendary post from that generation. It's great. While I was looking up discussions about Tieba, I saw some netizens sharing their memories of it. For instance, this user, Xianningshi, said Tieba was a world that reflected your true thoughts. I met my ex-boyfriend, my ex-ex-boyfriend, my ex-ex-ex-boyfriend on Tieba, and also a guy born on the exact same day, month, and year as me. He was the most unforgettable person throughout my entire middle school life. Later, he disappeared from his personal Tieba, and I could never find him again. That's when the Tieba era ended for me. Honestly, I think I'm probably one of the generations most connected to Tieba. I'm 21 this year, and I've been using Tieba since elementary school. I should mention, he wrote this in 2017, when some old posts on Baidu Tieba started disappearing, which made everyone feel nostalgic. He said, "When I was little, I'd go to forums for my favorite cartoons, chat with other fans, and collect cool character images. Later, I slowly started making friends on Tieba. In high school, I got into the habit of documenting my life there. When I was still in school, my biggest wish was to have my own computer, thinking I could install the Tieba PC client, which would be more convenient and I wouldn't have to worry about my parents snooping. Unfortunately, by the time I got to university, Tieba had already lost its prominence. Even in recent years, I've met some really wonderful people on Tieba. Sometimes I feel a real sense of regret that such a great platform just faded away. I even have a friend who's still dating the boy she met on Tieba back in 6th grade. Besides my own personal Tieba, you see, a lot of people had their own personal Tieba. That's pretty fascinating too. Just now, it was mentioned he disappeared from his personal Tieba. He actually had his own personal Tieba. It really felt like a personal space, which was a lot of fun. Besides my own personal Tieba, I'd visit forums like Bu Bar or Piano Bar, leaning more towards hobbies. There were also anime character forums like Conan Bar or Kaido Kid Bar. When I was applying for universities, I'd check out forums for specific majors and schools, and they actually helped me quite a bit. Tieba truly was a world that mirrored your innermost thoughts. What he described really represents a very significant period in his life. Oh, and there's another legendary post. This one isn't famous for being funny. It's also a record of this netizen's life. This user was called Cucumber Post Little Daisy. He said, "I can't believe it. Her QQ just came online, and she gave me her number, telling me to pick her up at his place tomorrow. She's leaving tomorrow afternoon. Too many people this afternoon, so she couldn't get on the train. What am I going to do tomorrow? I want her to stay, but I don't have a good reason. I'm so conflicted again." For a long time, there was no reply. Then, someone finally couldn't resist asking, "Did you two ever get together?" And then, 3 years later, 3.5 years later, he suddenly replied to that very post. He said, "Oh, it took me ages to remember when I even posted this. Haha, we're already married and our baby is 14 months old. Oh, and he just learned to walk the day before yesterday." Wow. You see, these kinds of records, they really are so touching. Just imagine if you shared such a conflicted moment online with strangers, and then you look back at those words later, it's just a flood of emotions. Yeah, It's not like some of the memes you see nowadays. Back in 2012, there was a post, "Bro, can you lend me 5,000 yuan? I need to take my girlfriend for an abortion." 5 years later, someone replied, "Oh, I didn't see this. Do you still need the money? The kid's 5 now. Haha. Thanks anyway." Yeah. A similar kind of post. There's another story that's considered a legendary post on Baidu Tieba. This post is titled Snow on Long Island. I originally thought about reading it out to you all, but I realized it's just way too long. If you're interested, you can look it up yourselves. Snow on Long Island. The snow of Long Island. Long Island, yes, in Penglai. Long Island, yes, in Penglai. Oh, no, it refers to Long Island in the United States. The snow of Long Island. Let me briefly recount the story for everyone. It's about a protagonist named Zhang Chunyang, who worked in an industry that existed in earlier times. A male escort in a nightclub, accompanying women for drinks and such. This protagonist, Zhang Chunyang, only had a junior high school education, but to be good at his job, he had a strong desire to learn. So, he learned many ways to brag. He'd casually say things like, "Li Ka-shing and I are like this." Or, "I went and bought an island somewhere." He'd brag to people every day, and slowly, he himself became part of that world of debauchery and extravagance. Later, he fell in love with a girl. This girl was very innocent and still in college. Then some things happened because of her. He kept telling her, "We're going to see the snow on Long Island." We heard the snow on Long Island is beautiful and so on. It was just big talk, casually mentioned. He then wavered between this extravagant life and his sincere feelings for the girl. In the end, they broke up. Many years passed without them seeing each other. Finally, the author, who observed this tragic love story from a third-person perspective, wrote about it. Zhang Chunyang, it seems, also became ruined due to gambling and other things. The last sentence the author wrote is the most memorable for many Tieba users. Zhang Chunyang always told that girl, "I'll take you to see the snow on Long Island," didn't he? His last line was, "He still yearns for the snow of Long Island, still yearns for the wind song and bird song of the pampas. It took me a long time to realize that Long Island has no snow." That's how it ends. Combined with the story I just described, it was actually a beautiful fantasy, because he said it just to brag. Long Island isn't a place that gets snow at all. It feels different when it's on a story forum versus on Tieba. Of course, any community, any public community, has social significance. Back then, Tieba saw many things similar to what later happened on Weibo. For example, during the Wenchuan earthquake, people posted requests for help there, and it actually achieved some results. There are also many records that are now considered tears of the era. For instance, I found a post from Southeast University in 2012 by a user named Expired Coffee. He posted, "Scored over 40 points above the cutoff, but still couldn't get into civil engineering. Is it hard to switch majors in college? So difficult." Later, he replied, "Indeed, I didn't get into civil engineering. I was admitted to computer science." Looking back now, it's quite poignant. Nowadays, it's like, if you can't get into computer science, you might end up in civil engineering. Fate, all right? The things we've discussed so far are descriptions of Tieba's cultural aspects. Let's return to Baidu. Tieba holds another significant meaning for Baidu. Previously, Baidu was merely an information broker, but now it began to provide information itself. Search pushes other websites and content providers to users. But through Tieba's UGC, it became a self-contained content provider, which was incredibly important. Before you'd go through Baidu, and Baidu would tell you to go elsewhere. Now it says, "Stay here." You'd think, "I have Tieba, why go anywhere else?" So people stayed on Baidu. During the development of Tieba, Junyu also expanded his product team. When we discussed BBS earlier, we mentioned Peking University's Yitahutu. At that time, a core member of the Yitahutu management team wasn't even from Peking University. He was from Communication University of China. Perhaps due to his passion, he participated in the development of Peking University's BBS. He was a third-year film and television production student named Mingyuan Li, who often shared his views on internet products. In August 2004, during a development forum, Mingyuan Li gave a presentation titled Yitahutu and the Development Trends of Chinese Online Communities. The title was grand, but the presentation was excellent. Junyu was immediately struck by it, believing Mingyuan Li was the only person he'd ever met who thought from a user's perspective rather than a business development one. Because previously, analyses of forums and communities usually focused on commercialization or top-down management. But he talked about users, about experience, from the bottom up. Junyu approached him and said, "Hello, I'm Junyu from Baidu. Do you know about Tieba? Would you be interested in discussing it?" Before Mingyuan Li could even respond, Junyu handed over his business card and left. A week later, Mingyuan Li joined Baidu as an intern. At that time, Baidu's product department also had a situation, as Junyu recalled. A large number of interns were treated as full-time employees. Because they didn't have systematic training, young people who understood users and products were a good fit, so Mingyuan Li became the product manager for Baidu Tieba. During his internship and under his leadership, Baidu Tieba experienced its most glorious period. By 2005, Tieba's traffic accounted for 11% of Baidu's total traffic. The Supergirl phenomenon that year also introduced many netizens to Tieba for the first time. The Supergirl Tieba suddenly became hugely popular. The Liuchun Tieba was the #1 Tieba on all of Baidu. You might not imagine it, but the daily post volume in the Liuchun Tieba alone exceeded the total post volume of Tianya, a major forum at the time. Just one Tieba. Just how popular Supergirl was back then. And the impact of Liuchun in 2005 was completely different from the 2004 Supergirl winner. You might remember the 2004 champion Zhang Hanyun with her Sweet and Sour Is Me song. Her total votes back then were over 200,000. In 2005, Li Yuchun received 3.52 million votes, and Zhou Bichang got 3.27 million votes. It was absolutely insane. And the Li Yuchun phenomenon in 2005 led to various industry changes. For example, it was the first time we saw large-scale digital music distribution really took off then. Taihe collaborated with Sohu, Tencent, Baidu, Mobile Monternet, and others, giving them 35% to 45% profit sharing. Li Yuchun's songs, even though internet users weren't as numerous back then, sold hundreds of thousands of copies. At this time, Baidu Tieba had already become an incredibly important product for Baidu. Its traffic alone once exceeded that of the entire Sina. By 2009, it accounted for 20% of Baidu's total traffic, making it a truly core Baidu product. In 2011, Tieba had 500 million users. At that time, China had 600 million internet users, meaning almost everyone online was using it. Ming Yuanli was also once one of the youngest executives in the entire internet industry, not just Baidu. At 29 years old, he was Baidu's vice president, long considered Robin Li's successor, even called Baidu's crown prince. We've talked about this many times. Of course, that's a later story. He later left due to various reasons. Besides Ming Yuanli, there were several other very capable people in the product team. For example, Yunfeng Sunday. How was Yunfeng Sun recruited? He had written a book called Google Search, From Beginner to Expert. In that era, there were still books specifically introducing search and practical methods. He was a super enthusiast. Jian Li was an internet enthusiast who graduated from Peking University and was very active on Sina's search forums. He was later scouted by Junyu and became product marketing director in 2007. These people were all found from among enthusiasts. Because Junyu recalled that salaries were low back then, unlike today. At that time, if you asked engineers to switch to product, who would? I write code, that's where the real skill is. Recruiting from outside was also difficult due to low salaries. So, finding these enthusiasts to join was the most cost-effective way. After Junyu left, the work was actually given to the two people I just mentioned, Yunfeng Sun and Jian Li. Big search, meaning web search, was Yunfeng Sun's responsibility. All other products were Jian Li's responsibility. So, they split the product team. The entire Baidu product team also had an intern named Xiaomeng Tian at the time. She wasn't even full-time yet, but she was already the product manager for Baidu Jidao. She was the one who launched Baidu Jidao from scratch. Let's also talk about Baidu Jidao. Baidu actually spotted the opportunity for Q&A very early on. This demand stemmed from Tieba, because in Tieba, you'd often find these so-called dead posts, just questions, with no one answering them. So, the idea was, can we put this into a dedicated product, specifically designed for Q&A? Especially so that once a user asks a question and others provide good answers, people wouldn't need to ask the same thing again. Before their earliest version was even released, they saw the news. Sina had launched iAsk. iAsk was even earlier than Baidu Jidao. So they felt a lot of pressure like, oh no, what do we do? A major portal is doing quite well with this, and if we launch ours now, it'll look like we're just copying them. But as it turned out, on the second day Baidu Jidao launched, its traffic surpassed iAsk. It was that popular. Having traffic really makes a difference. For one, Baidu had a massive amount of traffic back then, so they could easily direct users. And two, their product experience was significantly better than iAsk's. Baidu Jidao, which launched in October 2005, had accumulated 17 million questions by June 2007. With an average of 70,000 questions and 220,000 answers generated daily, that's an incredibly huge number. As you listen, you can gradually get a sense of it. This was essentially the early days of Weibo, or rather, an internet community. You always need a place for people to communicate and share information. And speaking of this, some younger listeners might ask, weren't you afraid of people messing things up? And why would anyone solve problems for free? This really speaks to how different the internet atmosphere was back then. If you were to launch a product like that today, it might not be as smooth as it was. There's that whole other layer to it. I honestly couldn't have imagined those two aspects. People back then were quite enthusiastic and relatively simpler. Online conversations were more straightforward. Now, if you ask a question, people might first question your motives before even thinking about how to help you solve the problem. After Baidu Jidao, on the 20th of April 2006, Baidu launched Baidu Baike, their encyclopedia. Within just 20 days, it had 100,000 entries, and registered users exceeded 300,000. On the 13th of July 2006, Baidu launched its own blog platform, Baidu Space. Oh, that existed too? Baidu Space was huge! I used Baidu Space for years! Really? By 2007, it was arguably Baidu's absolute peak. You'd go online, and the first thing you'd open was Baidu. And Baidu was more powerful than Google back then because it had a massive amount of its own content products. It could retain and capture a huge amount of traffic all by itself. Of course, you could say today's Baijiahao can also capture traffic, but Baijiahao is a completely different type of product. It doesn't offer the same user value. Think about it. Music, images, news, Tieba, Jidao, Baike, space, so many products. Each one was enormous. It felt like most products were already closed loop within Baidu. They didn't need to share traffic with other companies. From Baidu's perspective at the time, they might even have thought, can't I also do e-commerce well? Can't I do other things well? In the future, all internet traffic will be mine alone. Other companies were truly trembling back then. At that time, Tencent and Baidu were both criticized. The media often criticized these two companies, saying they were monopolizing, not giving other companies a chance to survive. Back then, we could do anything. Now, if we try to do something, you launch something similar, and then you don't let us make a living. It was as if they were bullying other small and medium-sized companies. Honestly, this era, specifically 2006 to 2007, was when Baidu's products and technology were exceptionally strong. While you could argue that Jidao and Baike still showed some traces of imitating foreign products, Tieba, if you look globally, had no similar product. It was a truly unique and brilliant design. Many Baidu products at that time also offered a very simple, clean, and excellent user experience. Everyone loved using them. This brings us to Baidu's product department back then, under Junyu's leadership. It was primarily based on collective decision-making. It wasn't just Junyu or Robin Li calling all the shots. Everyone discussed constantly, and eventually, a more reasonable solution emerged. Besides Robin Li, other executives and roles didn't participate too much in product plans. This was also a special historical period. Now, with many issues involved, making product decisions in a large organization isn't that easy. Back then, people wouldn't interfere too much, which was also crucial. Product decision-making was purer. What I just talked about was the internal perspective. Let's talk about the external perspective, about the competition. Baidu's main competitor at that time was, of course, Google. From a market share perspective, after Google started doing B2C, for quite some time, Google was still ahead. You mean domestically? Yes, domestically. Because back then, the first people to go online were still the elite. Using Google represented being advanced. Think about it. The logic is simple. You're online. You know there's the world's best search engine available. Why would you use a domestic one? But by the time Google reacted, and Baidu's experience improved, and all these Baidu products launched, it was actually a bit late for Google to formally localize for China. In July 2005, Kai-Fu Lee joined Google, specifically setting up a department for China to drive strategy. We briefly mentioned this when we talked about Google. By 2004, when Baidu had already created Tieba, Jidao, and Baike, Google couldn't keep up. In that year, Baidu's market share had already surpassed Google's. And as everyone realized that search could outperform portals, it was seen as the next generation of portals, and portals were about to be phased out. So, at this point, the competitors really started piling up. The main competitor besides Google was actually Yahoo. In 2003, when Yahoo entered China, they first approached Baidu, wanting to discuss an acquisition. They wanted Baidu to take over Yahoo China in the future, and offered $150 million to buy them out. Robin Li didn't agree. So, Yahoo turned around and bought another company, Hyperlink's 3721. Essentially, 3721 merged with Yahoo China, and Hyperlink became the president of Yahoo China. And just a quick note here, when we mention 3721, it might sound like it was just a small niche product back then. But 3721's traffic actually far exceeded Baidu's at the time. It was a really important product. Everyone online used it. At least when I first started using the internet, I only knew 3721 to search for things. We'll talk more about Hyperlink later. Today, many people's impression of Hyperlink is that he's a bit of a loudmouth, but back then, he was a fierce warrior. After getting the title of Yahoo China president, he quickly implemented reforms, localized Yahoo Chinese, rapidly launched email and search, and seized market share. He even launched a dedicated search website called Xiaoyuzhou. In its first year, Yahoo China had $40 million in revenue and $10 million in profit. By the end of 2004, Yahoo China surpassed Google, becoming the second largest search engine after Baidu. This was a significant achievement. They went straight to second place. They were doing so well. This was the end of 2004. Then in mid-2005, on August 11th, news suddenly broke. Alibaba announced the acquisition of all Yahoo China's assets. Jack Ma became Yahoo China's president and Hyperlink resigned. This was a bit confusing for everyone. Yahoo China had been doing so well for over a year. How did it suddenly become Jack Ma's? That's because Hyperlink had many disagreements with Yahoo at the time. Many of his strategic directions didn't get headquarters support, and they fell out. This past event, as I mentioned before, we'll discuss later. Hyperlink, how should I put it? He basically offended everyone he could in the Chinese internet industry. Back then, entrepreneurs could still appear on variety shows. So, I found a clip of Zhou Hongyi speaking on Day Up. Xiaolei, take a listen.
Hello? This is Robin. Robin hates me quite a bit. I understand that. But who told him to monopolize Chinese search? I can't stand these monopolistic industries, these big brothers. I just love challenging these big brothers. Everyone can understand that, right? What search engine did you use before? Baidu. Did you ever use Google? No, never.
Just from that short clip, you can tell that while entrepreneurs might appear on variety shows now, they wouldn't speak so casually on them. But back then, you could still speak so freely. Anyway, back to it. After Jack Ma became Yahoo China's president, he announced he had secured $1 billion from Jerry Yang to directly compete with Baidu again. He declared that Baidu's technological lead was a thing of the past. We will prove that Yahoo understands Chinese better than Baidu. From now on, Yahoo is search and search is Yahoo. The industry view back then was that Jack Ma, well, he was very aggressive and understood marketing very well. So, people wondered if Baidu was in danger. At that time, Baidu and Yahoo China went to war again, but this time it was against Jack Ma. Many friends might not realize that Jack Ma and Robin Li directly competed like this back then. I don't really recall that, mainly because to compete with Google and Yahoo, Baidu even made a short film back then. At the time, Flirting Scholar was super popular, so they made a film that kind of rode on the coattails of that movie. The main theme was that foreigners just don't understand Chinese.
I know.
Not necessarily. I know, you don't know. I know, you don't know. I know, you don't know. I know, you don't know me. I know you don't know me.
I know.
I know, not necessarily. I know.
Got a question? Baidu it. It understands Chinese best, with unique Chinese word segmentation and tokenization technology for more precise comprehension. It truly grasps Chinese, with human-like recognition and transliteration of keywords that align with Chinese customs. It respects Chinese the most, offering complete Chinese natural language processing and web analysis technology. It's most dedicated to Chinese, boasting the world's most outstanding and unrivaled Chinese tech team. It enjoys Chinese the most, owning the world's largest Chinese community, Tieba.
Just this one little anecdote about sentence breaks. It was actually quite captivating and interesting. The gist was about a foreigner with a girl, encountering a character like Tang Bohu. There was a notice, and it was about how people interpreted it. Tang Bohu's interpretation was definitely much better than the foreigner's. In the end, the girl by the foreigner's side also left him, implying that the foreigner simply didn't understand Chinese. And honestly, because they featured a foreigner, it somewhat helped to temper people's nationalistic sentiments. You could feel that when watching it, right? This was mainly because Yahoo and Google were both foreign products, so that ad was indeed quite famous at the time, and even won an advertising festival award. The competition between Baidu and Yahoo China and Jack Ma can actually be described as a very unsuccessful period for Jack Ma later on. It didn't go well at all. There were several core reasons. The first was a very similar problem to what Zhou Hongyi faced. Same bed, different dreams, or divided loyalties. Jack Ma, first and foremost, made a very correct decision to compete with Baidu. He transformed Yahoo China into a pure search page. This search page was very minimalist. Headquarters was very unhappy, asking, "What do you mean? Don't you want to make money?" Because Yahoo was a portal site, and he cut everything else. Was that acceptable? Eventually, under pressure from headquarters, it was reverted. At this point, the morale of Yahoo China's internal team was severely hit. Jack Ma, you're not even the boss, so what's the point of all these changes? Everyone's enthusiasm just vanished. Also, Jack Ma himself had Taobao, and he hoped Yahoo China could integrate organically with Taobao, but Yahoo didn't think that way. Yahoo wanted to cooperate with JD.com and with everyone, because at that time, search also included things like product search and so on. The debate was whether to only use Taobao's products or include others as well. The second problem was with its positioning. As just mentioned, Yahoo China wanted to do full web search, capable of searching e-commerce content, but this didn't really take off. It was eventually proven that, at least at the time, the effect wasn't very good. People mostly used it to search for information, or like Baidu, to create more content, communities, and all sorts of other content. In this area, it was consistently beaten by Baidu. Users wouldn't stay. If you tried to force it, it wouldn't work well. You can imagine the scenario. People went to Taobao specifically to search for products. The third was a team issue. When Jack Ma took over, many team members had followed Xiaoyuzhou, so the team experienced significant instability. Anyway, for various reasons, after all the turmoil, within just a few years, this happened in 2005, by 2008, Yahoo China and Kubei.com merged into a very niche e-commerce guide website, essentially exiting the historical stage. Also in 2008, Taobao blocked Baidu's crawlers for the first time, which was a significant move. Before that, Baidu could search Taobao, which is something hard to imagine today, being able to directly search all products within Taobao. This was also a strategic decision, and it actually foreshadowed Baidu's future predicament. Because content on the Chinese internet was increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few giants, and these giants wouldn't be particularly open to you, right? The more mature the internet industry became, the more trouble Baidu faced. Search originally relied on an open internet. In the mobile era, as we all know, it became about apps, which made things even more complicated. Besides Google and Yahoo, China actually had many other competitors. For example, the earliest was China Search, founded in December 2003 by search technology expert Chen Pei, with investment from the China Internet News Center and IDG Group. Look at the name, China Search with China in it, and Chen Pei served as CEO. Its abbreviation was Zhongso. In August 2004, Charles Jiang grandly announced the official launch of Sogou. We've mentioned before that Sogou originally started as a search engine. And Charles Jiang famously declared at the time that adopting a follow-the-leader strategy was safer in China, saying, "Those who run ahead are martyrs, I tell you." Then in March 2006, Tencent launched its search engine, So. In December 2006, NetEase launched Youdao Search. In 2009, Microsoft launched Bing Search. Looking back, it was a very lively era. Every company had a search engine. If you wanted to search online, there were even many aggregators that would present you with results from various search engines. It was quite a bustling time back then. Just like today's generative AI search, right? But apart from Google and Yahoo, you could say the others were mostly just tagging along. In 2005, China's search engine market was a three-way standoff. Data showed that Baidu, Google, and Yahoo held market shares of 37%, 23%, and 21% respectively. Yahoo still had a significant share. Yes, I was just about to say, this is one report I found. In another report, I found a huge difference. The other report showed Baidu at 51.5%, Google at 33%, and Yahoo at 4%. The gap between these figures is really quite large. I'm not even sure if they're from the same year, right?
Exactly.
Then, the report from 2006 mentioned that Baidu's market share was 64.5%, Google's was 20.6%, and Yahoo's was 5%. Essentially, it was still two giants, with the rest just tagging along. Let's go back to Google. Google's Chinese subsidiary Manyu was officially established only in April 2006. The name Google for the subsidiary was decided at that time. I remember at the time when this news was released, I thought the name Goog sounded a bit rustic. It refers to a bountiful harvest, but the character Gu for grain seemed a bit unsophisticated back then. Today, everyone's used to it and just calls it Gooj. By around 2009, China's search engine market was essentially dominated by two players. According to iResearch, Baidu held 63.1% of the market share, and Google held 33.2%. The others were negligible, not even reaching 4% or 5%. This is very important, and when we look back at history, many people might even have a Mandela effect, thinking Google always did well. But in fact, after years of competing with Baidu, Google could never quite beat them. Google's products, technology, and even marketing had some issues adapting to the Chinese market. And other competitors, whether Yahoo, Tencent, NetEase, or Microsoft, none of their search engines could beat Baidu. Baidu truly fought its way out of a fierce, cutthroat environment back then. It proved itself in a real competitive landscape. Around 2009, Baidu was indeed the best Chinese search engine. Kai-Fu Lee later recalled the difficulties of localization in China, which were pretty much what we'd imagine. He said, "Every new feature we developed required a tough battle with headquarters. This made us slow and exhausted us. Many Google China employees grew tired of fighting with the parent company and left in frustration. These are all problems that overseas companies face when doing business in China." We've actually discussed many such cases before. In 2008, iResearch released a report stating that Baidu's full-year advertising revenue in 2007 had already surpassed Sina, making it China's largest advertising platform. 2007. Because in fact, most internet companies today are advertising companies. This should be easy to understand. For example, ByteDance is an advertising company, Baidu is an advertising company, Alibaba is an advertising company. Their monetization primarily relies on advertising, so advertising revenue represents the scale of your entire business. Baidu already was by 2007. By the end of 2007, the total number of internet users in China reached 270 million, and the usage rate of search engines was as high as 72.4%. This reflects our experience. Don't underestimate this 72.4% figure. In the early days of the internet, it really felt like, you do your thing, I'll do mine for a long time. There wasn't one particularly centralized product that everyone was using. Portal websites could be considered the first batch that everyone used, but even combining three major portal sites, the penetration rate I found was only between 60% and 80%. This was one product, one company, with over 70% usage, essentially making it one of the earliest centralized products to emerge. We can also recall, until what year you still had your browser's homepage set to Baidu? Just think about it. Actually, this was a process that continued for many years. By the end of 2007, Baidu's search engine web index database had reached 15 billion web pages. Think about it before. Everyone was working with tens of millions of web pages, supporting tens of millions of web pages. Now it has 15 billion web pages in its database, making it the world's largest Chinese web page database. After Baidu's IPO, its revenue in 2005 was 300 million, net profit 38 million. In 2006, revenue was 938 million, net profit 360 million. In 2007, full-year revenue was 1.74 billion, an annual growth of 108%. Profit was 545 million, a year-on-year growth of 229%. This means that no matter how you look at it from data, users, or all aspects, 2007 was the year Baidu truly took the top spot. It was China's #1 internet company. No netizen didn't know Baidu. In these years, Robin Li was also known to everyone. In 2005, he received the CCTV Annual Economic Figure Award. In 2006, he was named the world's best leader by Businessweek. On the 17th of April, 2006, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences named him China's most influential wealthy person. At the end of 2007, the Hurun IT Rich List was unveiled, and Robin Li became China's mainland IT richest person with a net worth of 18 billion RMB. This was Robin Li when he was relatively young and became the IT richest person. Anyway, it's one of those photos because we've certainly seen a lot of them over the years. Honestly, my feeling is he hasn't aged much. He's always looked pretty much the same. Because when I search for information now and compare, this one is clearly younger. His recent appearances show he's aged a bit, but he's still handsome, very handsome. 2007 was the year Baidu took the top spot. But something else happened in 2007, and you'll find the coincidences of history are truly ingenious. Just like Baidu's first search query was about Zhang Chaoyang, when Baidu took the top spot in 2007, another event occurred. Steve Jobs launched the first iPhone in San Francisco, ushering in the mobile internet era. Just as you took the top seat, the screws on your chair were already loosening. These were all foreshadowing. Looking at Baidu's homepage in 2007, Xiaolei, basically, there weren't many big changes later on. It was the familiar Baidu homepage: news, web pages, Tieba, Zhidao, MP3, images. Below that, there's more space, and basically nothing else. It's very concise, yes. Also, there was a very prominent link below: set Baidu as your homepage. Because at that time, the homepage of most Chinese people's browsers had already become Baidu. The biggest event for Baidu's development next was in early 2010, when Google, a longtime competitor of Baidu, withdrew from China. This was Baidu's most important turning point. There would be no more important turning point in Baidu's entire history. We say, was Google's withdrawal from China a good thing for Baidu? On the surface, of course, it was a good thing. You lost a competitor. But as the saying goes, blessings may turn into misfortunes, and misfortunes may turn into blessings. For Baidu, this was a huge disaster. It was too bad. It's almost universally recognized in the internet field as Baidu's biggest crisis. When you start making money effortlessly, when you feel you have no competitors, when Baidu has its most important 90+% market share, the company's combat effectiveness is finished. This isn't me saying it, I'm just putting it out there. This isn't my opinion. Many media friends and industry experts have analyzed this. Quoting a financial media outlet I found, it said, after losing Google, a heavyweight competitor, Baidu also seemed to lose its drive for innovation and progress. In those stable days, Baidu's sales department began to gain the upper hand. Business dominated search, and technical products became a means to serve business. This is a perspective that many people would agree with. Back then, product and technology were very important. We all know that many of the products mentioned earlier were created between 2003 and 2007. But after that, the products we see that are commonly used now are probably mainly Baidu NetDisk. We don't have a very deep impression of other products. Most of the products still in use were made before 2007. There's a very clear sign: the change in Baidu's second-in-command. Before, Baidu's second-in-command was always Yongshu because he was a co-founder. Yongshu left very early, even before the IPO in 2004, because his strategic direction was different. As mentioned earlier, he always leaned towards technical services. After leaving Baidu, he started doing investment and charity and didn't participate in later business. From 2005 onwards, the entire second-in-command of Baidu, the person below 1 and above 10,000, was Hailong Xiang. He was Baidu's second-in-command for 14 years. He built the company's sales iron army. In the long run, Baidu's business revolved more around sales. Hailong Xiang is of course very remarkable and admired. He was very good at sales. But we can also perceive that a company culture centered on sales will be somewhat different. This also laid the groundwork for what came later. The next time a second-in-command appeared was in 2017, when Qi Lu joined. Only then did the company have a COO who was relatively more concerned with products and technology. In any ecosystem, not having competitors is not a good thing. In 2009, before Google China withdrew, Junyu left Baidu. This is also a signal that people often mention. Junyu left in 2009, Google withdrew in 2010. After that, the situation faced was completely different from before. What kind of situation was this? What did Baidu do next? This will have to be discussed in the next episode. It needs to be split into 2 episodes. I can't finish it. Later, Baidu. At first glance, might seem like it didn't do much, but Baidu did a lot. Nuomi, Waimai, Maps, still many. Indeed, there are many more stories to come. Before we finish, let me briefly mention one more thing. Around 2010, it was also when internet product managers were first considered very important. This was when the concept of a product manager just became popular, and it was believed that product managers could change the world. Because if you look at the products Baidu made earlier, they truly profoundly influenced the entire company's development and business. But it was also because of that era that the opportunity to define a product like Baidu Tieba today is almost non-existent. Because back then, from their product team's perspective, many needs naturally emerged. I have such a large traffic volume. What do these people need? I'll just create a product to satisfy them. This kind of opportunity was truly a golden age opportunity. Right now, too many minds are racking their brains, trying to figure out what to supply you with next. To grab your attention, right? In fact, many product managers, when they're thinking, they're trying to get you to click more, shop more, place more orders, like adding a little shopping cart, right? Junyu is also one of the first and most influential product managers in the internet field, perhaps even the times most influential. I grew up reading Teacher Yujun's sayings, and later I was lucky enough to work with him for 2 or 3 years, which was really fortunate. Although now he's not exactly successful in the traditional sense, he's doing self-media and has left the product path that's overly modest, but I still learned so much. I remember very clearly, one thing Junyu left behind was called the 12 p.m. rules. They were incredibly classic and widely circulated. These were some of the sayings he shared with his team at Baidu around 2005. They practically became the product manager's Bible back then. And these weren't even written by Junyu himself. Yufeng Sun, the head of Baidu Search, whom I mentioned earlier, summarized and compiled them for him. It's a bit like the Analects compiled into 12 rules, and they became incredibly popular. And they're so simple. I can read them all out to you here. Everyone, just listen and think about what product managers were focusing on in that era. First, a product manager must first be a user. Second, look at problems from the user's perspective. Third, user experience is a complete process. Fourth, pursue results, don't do useless things. Fifth, discover needs, don't create them. Sixth, deciding what times not times to do is often more important than deciding what times to times do. Seventh, users are hard to educate. Cater to users, don't try to change them. Eighth, focus on the majority of users, surpass competitors at critical points, launch quickly, and continuously improve through practice. Ninth, give users stable experience expectations. 10th, if you're not sure what to do, first see what others are doing. 11th, treat users like idiots. Don't make users think or choose. Think ahead for them. 12th, don't give users things they don't want. Anything useless is a kind of harm to the user. Every single one of them hits the nail on the head. My feeling is, it's not that everyone will agree with everything here. You might have one point you don't quite agree with, you have your own thoughts. But there won't be a single point that you just gloss over, thinking it's meaningless or unimportant. Every single point is crucial. You can delve into each one, and they actually represent many different dimensions of product development. When you're working on something, you can really ponder these and derive some principles. Of course, just looking at these words, they can be a bit too abstract. Often they're easier to understand when you're actually working on product solutions. Looking at them today, they're not particularly outdated. Around 2010 was also when people started to recognize the value of product managers. It was really at that time that the role of an internet product manager became clearly defined for the public. Before that, what was a product manager? What should a product manager do? There were no standards or clear positioning for their job content, no specific category. There were people called product managers before, but they weren't doing the same kind of work. The internet product manager, as a system, really formed at this time. Teacher Su Jie, who worked at Taobao and is also an old friend in Hangzhou, his book, Everyone is a Product Manager, was a must-read for me when I started my career. Everyone knows how famous it was back then. It was published in 2010, right around this time. And it's not just about product, but also tech culture and engineering culture. Baidu was very important in this regard. As Xiaolei just mentioned, it was like a Whampoa military academy. Later, Didi, Meituan, ByteDance, a huge number of their tech talents came from Baidu. Before, when we talked about the Whampoa Military Academy, it was perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, because many people left to start their own businesses. But Baidu truly was a place that mass-produced talent. It produced first-line and second-line managers, and then these talents were transferred to various teams. Many of our current working methods were indeed established by Baidu before 2010. Of course, looking at it today, things are a bit different from what they once were. Finally, I have some nostalgic things to share with you. Baidu Search has recorded years of what ordinary people cared about is also quite interesting. Let's look at the annual search rankings. Starting from 2004, Baidu began releasing its own annual keyword rankings. In 2004, the top one was MP3. You can tell how important searching for music was. Then Bubblegum, Daolang, QQ, BT, Likely BT Downloads, Mice Love Rice, Guojingjing, House of Flying Daggers, Chinese Style Divorce, Little Soldier Legend. In 2005, MP3, Supergirl, Fairy Tale, QQ, Li Yuchong, Daejianggem, The Myth, Baoxian, Zuxian, Jinletuan. In 2006, the top 10 keywords were MP3, Popcart, QQ, XLA, Dance Central, Liu Chun, My Own Swordsman, Internet TV, World Cup, Bajongbachi. In 2007, MP3, QQ, the 17th National Congress, Sunlei, NBA, Popcart, Funds, Video, Superboy, Harmonious Society. By then, funds were already a thing. You can see it's quite interesting how people's interests kept changing. Alright, we'll stop here, having covered up to 2007. Baidu's peak was around then, and in 2010, Google exited China. What happened to Baidu next? Baidu venturing into e-commerce, food delivery, and iQIYI. What's that story? We'll save that for the next episode.
You can subscribe and listen to Caffè Breve on Xiaoyuzhou. We also welcome you to share and forward our episodes. I'm this episode's producer, Naishu. See you next time.